Okay, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order the May 19th, 2016 meeting of the City of Bellingham Planning Commission. Thank you all for attending. We have a good crowd tonight. And at this point, I'd like to ask everyone to silence electronic devices. So cell phones, if you're working on a laptop or anything, please make sure that the volume's turned off. Thank you. Heather, can you please call the roll?
Holly Teiching.
Here.
Garrett O'Brien.
Here.
Tom Grinstead. Here. Jeff Brown.
Here.
Phyllis McKee. Here. Lisa Anderson. Here. Steve Crooks.
Here.
Okay. So we have 3 sets of meeting minutes to approve before we get into the topics from tonight's meeting. And we'll also have a public comment period I'll talk about. There's minutes from April 7th, 14th, and 21st, and they were distributed to everybody on the Planning Commission. I wanted to make one comment. We'll take any comment if any has any, but there was some discussion in the April 7th minutes regarding our discussion about accessory dwelling unit inventories, and I feel like there needs to be more information added to that section of the minutes. I don't think it accurately captures the discussion that we had. And Heather has asked that we move, assuming there's no other objections, that we move those minutes forward so that she can proceed to sending those to council, because their next meeting is before our next meeting, but that she's going to work with me to make those recommended additions, and then we'll circulate them to the commission before that occurs. Does that make sense?
Can we trust you?
Well, I'm going to let you look at them first, so you don't have to trust me. But yes, you can. So with that, unless there's any other discussion on the 3 sets of minutes from the 7th, 14th, 21st, we could do a head nod around. Yes? Okay. So with those, the minutes are approved. So before we move into tonight's 2 public hearings, there's going to be a public comment period. And this public comment period is for discussion of any topic other than the 2 public hearings we're going to have tonight. So if you're here to talk about one of the 2 public hearings, you'll have an opportunity to speak about that when we have the hearing. But if you want to speak about something else, something completely unrelated to tonight's topics, anything you want, you can come up to the mic and you can have 3 minutes to talk to us about it. So is there anyone who'd like to make comments tonight about anything other than the 2 public hearings? Okay. Seeing no one, we will close the public comment period. And with that, we will move into our first public hearing. And I'm sorry, one is a public hearing and one is a public meeting. Is that correct? Chris, you?
They're both public hearings.
They're both public hearings, okay.
So the second one's a quasi-judicial public hearing.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. So there's 2 items on the agenda tonight. The first is a public hearing regarding Lydia Place, a proposed expansion, and then the second is regarding amendments to the WW institutional master plan. So we'll be hearing the Lydia Place item first, and then we'll close that public hearing and move into the Western Washington University institutional master plan hearing. And so with that, I think we can turn it over to Kurt. You're filling in for Greg, and I'm going to take it away.
Yes, good evening. Kurt Nabafeld. I am filling in for Mr. Ockett tonight. A little too close, sorry about that. For this hearing, I would like to introduce the applicant, have them come down as well. It's Emily O'Connor from the Lydia Place. Will be presenting tonight. As you mentioned, it's a consideration of a comprehensive plan amendment, rezone, and some text amendments. So we thought that it would be a good opportunity tonight to let Lydia Place folks kind of present, start off and give you an overview of their current situation to make sure everyone understands exactly what's happening there before we actually got into the staff report on that. So with that, I'd turn it over to the Lydia folks, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us here. My name is Emily O'Connor. I have the privilege of serving as Executive Director of Lydia Place. And with me tonight is Schultze Willows, our Development and Outreach Director, and our designated button masher here for our PowerPoint slides, so it's just going to keep me on track. So I just wanted to start by saying thank you for taking the time to consider this issue. As I'm sure you're all aware, homelessness is on the rise here in Bellingham in a pretty big way, and in a way that is startling many of us as to trying to figure out what some of the solutions might be. In the last 2 years, we've seen a 27% increase in the number of homeless individuals in our community. And in the past year alone, we saw a 75% increase in the number of unsheltered individuals sleeping on our streets, in tents, doorways, the folks who are really present in our community. This comes at a time when our nonprofit community partners are working really tirelessly to find housing placements, coupled with both critical low vacancy rates and the resulted increase in the rise of housing costs. Our community is faced with nothing short of a humanitarian crisis. As a dedicated partner serving homeless individuals and families for nearly 27 years in our community, Lydia Place has been at the table and answering the call from the mayor, from other community leaders and partners to do whatever we can to try and address this crisis. In the past 4 years, Lydia Place has built new programs, launched new partnerships, and doubled our housing capacity. We recently purchased a building in the Birchwood neighborhood to serve as supportive housing for chronically homeless and disabled women. In every way we can, we are trying to bring as many resources to the table to address this issue of homelessness. Lydia Place has been a proud partner in the Puget neighborhood for over 26 years, operating our transitional housing facility there for homeless women with children. This facility provides a safe haven for the roughly 25 homeless families every year, some of our most vulnerable. And though rarely easy, this program is a crucial component of our community's response system for homeless mothers with children. And it's one of the ways that Lydia Place is able to engage at-risk families and vulnerable children in the critical early years of their lives. This facility, if you've never been there, is attached to the one-story portion you see there is our program hub. And it includes a classroom, a family resource room, there's a community garden, an orchard, and it's surrounded on 3 sides by some really great green space and trails. We're nestled there in a pretty beautiful spot on about 1.4 acres. 18 months ago, as the rising rates of homelessness began to solidify, our city partners began asking who in the nonprofit sector would be willing to step up and develop some housing for homeless households. It was then that we, as a staff and a board, began to look at the process of determining feasibility about building additional capacity here on this piece of property. The need for more housing is really present, and yet we are in a situation where it's a little bit hard to know where to put those units of housing and how to get them built. The concept of this proposal is to expand the campus of support for homeless young mothers, building on our dedication and commitment to interrupting the cycle of poverty for our vulnerable children who today are sleeping in cars, in tents, and on our streets. Here's just one example. Last month, we had a young couple give birth to their first child in the hospital, and they exited the hospital to the streets with their newborn. They spent 4 nights sleeping on the street before we were able to get them into a housing program. And that's just one example that I happen to be aware of at the moment, but these are the kinds of things that are happening throughout our community with some of our most vulnerable members, our children. In 2015, our homeless system served 81 homeless mothers between the ages of 18 and 24. And currently we have over 20 of those mothers who are pregnant or parenting on our housing waiting list. On any given day, you may know 1 in every 5 homeless person is a child under the age of 10, and that's a pretty staggering number. Among a myriad of other consequences, children experiencing homelessness are 3 times more likely to suffer from emotional and behavioral problems. Early interventions, such as those that the Lydia Place Parenting Support Program, case management, child therapy, and connections to community resources can provide, are essential in breaking the cycle of poverty and homelessness for these kids. Adding to our existing campus by building 8 to 10 units of housing makes sense for many reasons. The first of which is that Lydia Place acts as a steward of a community resource. We already own this piece of property and our community has invested in it, which greatly reduces development costs, especially as developable lots in the city of Bellingham are scarce, and those that do exist are incredibly cost prohibitive to acquire. At this point in time, we feel that it's our obligation and our duty to explore all possibilities for increased impact from existing resources. This is a time for creativity, flexibility, and responsiveness. And adding to our existing campus and maximizing this resource for our community benefit is some way that Lydia Place can be both responsive and adaptable. I want to be clear, though, we're only considering this project because we want to make the best use of our community's resources. The question we asked ourselves in starting this conversation was this: can we do more with a resource we already own? That was our foundational question. Can we do more with this to help our community? The second reason is that this campus is centrally located. It's close to downtown, to park and recreational facilities such as Civic Field and Arnie Hanna Aquatic Center. It's within walking distance to shopping, grocery stores, Carl Kosher Elementary, and it's on a newly created City of Bellingham Safe Routes to School. It's also a quarter of a mile from the bus line. Thirdly, and perhaps most important, this population, homeless young mothers, pregnant and with infants, are highly vulnerable, making access to support critical in effectiveness of such programs. And the nice thing about that is when we co-locate them on our existing campus, they have access to that critical support. Those supports include things like housing case management, parenting education, children's programming, life skills classes, and our community garden, which you can see there on the wall. Lastly, as you can see from some of these maps and photos, Lydia Place, the campus is nestled in a green belt in the Puget neighborhood, reducing community impact of such a development. And though we recognize and acknowledge the concerns and feelings of our closest neighbors and any others who might prefer that we don't build these units here, Lydia Place is committed to being responsive and engaged with our neighbors. We've taken our neighbors' concerns very seriously, and we welcome dialogue at every opportunity. We acknowledge that the highly vulnerable population that we're serving does not come without its challenges. And at the same time, it is exactly this vulnerability that makes this location ideal. These families need significant support, and they need a community and a neighborhood. We ask our neighbors to partner with us by providing feedback whenever they see something that concerns them, and to participate in building the community, the support, and the accountability we want in every neighborhood. This year, Lydia Place expanded our newly formed parent support program, which now includes a team of 5 parent-child educators and is located right there on Gladstone Street. There's a growing body of scientific research about what happens to our children when they experience adverse childhood experiences. And what we know is that there's a significant and high correlation between adverse childhood experiences and homelessness as adults. And this is where we can have greatest impact in our community, is by protecting our children from the earliest, from birth. We have an opportunity here to make a lifelong difference in the lives of those children, the most vulnerable children, and we need everyone in our community to participate in keeping our kids safe. Up on this slide, you can see a little bit of the land. It's a really beautiful spot. If you haven't been there, I encourage you to come by. There were many factors that we considered in feasibility for this project. The first one that we tackled was that we are nestled on some wetlands, which makes it both beautiful and tricky to develop. Last year, we hired a local firm to delineate the wetlands and get a proposal together about how this building would impact the wetlands, and the result was very positive. So it indicated that we did have enough room to place the building without impacting the wetland itself, and that any impact of the buffer could be successfully offset by enhancing the native plants and removing invasive species in the wetland itself. In addition to the wetlands, we've had preliminary site reviews with our engineer regarding stormwater and have been collecting data on the use of our parking lot by staff and guests for the past 8 months and residents for the past 2 years. Further, our initial conversations regarding design really focused on security and designing for neighborhood cohesiveness. To this end, we've met with Officer Eric Osterkamp to learn about the crime prevention through environmental design program and how we can incorporate these building and design strategies into our plans. Lastly, I would just say Lydia Place is a dedicated partner in our effort to end homelessness, and we are willing to step up and be adaptable to try and figure out some positive solutions going forward. We're grateful for this partnership in our community and happy to have this opportunity to present this project to you and to get to your feedback and ideas as well. So thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll kind of get into some of the technical sides of the issue. As noted, this proposal includes a site-specific rezone and comprehensive plan amendment and zoning text amendment. Specifically, we're looking at changing the language to Area 6 of the Puget neighborhood. Currently, Area 6 is the entire site, or the entire site is Area 6 of the Puget neighborhood. We're also looking at zoning table regulations on page 116 of your staff report, or of the packet. You can actually see the specific changes in those special regulations where we are adding transitional and permanent supportive housing facilities in this area. As was noted, this facility has been in operation for over 25 years. The existing zoning does allow this use to occur here. It allows a total of 32 occupants. That was established back in 1995 as part of the Puget Neighborhood Plan update. Currently, there are about 8 women there and their children living at the site. As mentioned, the applicant would like to create about 8 to 11 units in a new building. Any development associated with this, those units would have to go through a multifamily design review because they're proposing individual units. It would also have to be subject to all of our standard development regulations, including our critical area ordinance. As mentioned by Ms. O'Connor, they have already looked at the wetland information there, believe that it can be properly mitigated. Obviously, that would have to go through our standard city review. They would have to formally apply for a critical area permit, and then there would be a review process associated with that. So any development there would be held to all typical development regulations within the Bellingham Municipal Code. This type of facility actually allows for more permanent and private living quarters for these folks. The site is adequately served by public infrastructure. It's close to essential services there. There are restaurants, there are grocery stores and all that generally in the general location. Also, one of the things that I think is really important here is that it's an efficient use of land. They've got an existing service that's operating here. As we know, land is of a precious resource here in the city, and one of the main comprehensive plan goals and policies is efficient use of the remaining land that we have here. So we've got a site that's close to services that's being utilized currently as that, and still has the opportunity to provide these permanent housing units. We have received public comment in this. In your packet, you'll see both pros and cons. There have been many people that are very supportive of this proposal. There have been some concerns expressed about the operation and management of the current facility. I believe that, and as Emily noted tonight, they're definitely open to trying to work through these problems. Some of these things through operational and how they manage the people there. I think there's always opportunity there to ensure that Lydia Place can work with neighbors to address concerns. Obviously, Lydia Place provides needed and essential services for a community. Just in the presentation alone, you could see how important this service is and the need is for our community. Because of that, our administration and city council has consistently supported Lydia Place through funding, grants and funding. Every year we've been giving to these folks to ensure that they can help with an issue that faces our community. As noted in more detail in the staff report, the proposal clearly meets the rezone and comprehensive plan. I think Mr. Ockett obviously did a good job of showing that in more detail. I would just focus you there if you had any specific concerns about any of the individual criteria. Staff believes that it does meet all of the criteria. Staff supports this and believes that it should move forward. As such, we have drafted findings and recommendations for your review. Obviously, your role in this process is to hold a public hearing, to adopt findings, conclusions, and make a recommendation to the City Council. The City Council would then hold an additional public hearing and make the final decision on this. So with that, we're available for questions, or we can go to public comment.
Thank you, Kurt. I think we should take public comment unless there's like some specific, maybe technical questions that someone has, but I think it would be nice to hear the public speak, get that information too, and then we can kind of have a bigger, broader picture before we ask questions. So with that, I think we'll open the public hearing for comment. And so you'll have an opportunity to come up and speak. We give you 3 minutes. I'll remind you when you have 30 seconds left, so you can try and wrap up your thoughts at that point. And please, when you come up to the microphone, you need to state your name and address for the record, and then share your thoughts with us. There's 5 people who've signed up. You don't have to sign up to speak. So if someone is interested in speaking and they didn't sign up, when you're done, when the signed up people are done, then you can just come on down and speak. And if you signed up but don't want to speak, you don't have to. Sometimes people sign up without the intention to. So with that, the first person on the list is Jeff Jacoby, and then Janice Marlega, and then Tammy Thiel. And I'm sorry if I mispronounced anybody's name. We can go from there. Thank you.
My name is Jeff Jacoby.
Jacoby, sorry.
1529 St. Paul Street, Beham. I've written, I'm sure you've seen my letters that I've written, and before I get into anything, I'd like to just start out and say myself and my neighbors, the community that's around the Lydia Place, we're not fighting to put something that's in our backyard, you know, something negative or whatever in our backyard. It's already there. We have already been living with this for 25 years. We've already been a part of this community, this outreach, this ability for people who have unfortunate circumstances to find success. We've been there. We've been the neighbors who allow and embrace this in our community, and put up with the issues that come from that. Whatever, you know, the broad spectrum of issues that come from the situations that these people are dealing with. You know, last night I was woken up at 11:30 by a very, very loud screaming child. And much to my wife's horror, she literally had to shut the window and crank a bunch of fans because there was a child just wailing. And it's, you know, it's hard to put it, to express the day-to-day aspects of this. But as a community, we have embraced it. We don't call the police. We sit there and we understand the situations that are going on. So that said, we're not fighting against something going new in our backyard. We're not being NIMBYs in this. We're saying, you know what, we have embraced this. This is already there. But I'd like to focus more on a couple of the things. You know, the first obviously is the environmental aspect of this. We're on the bottom of a very large hill, and that very large hill is being developed all the way up. There are still very big pieces of land that are being developed from right across the street on up to right above us. There is a whole new housing development that was put in there about 3 or 4 years ago. We've seen an increase in stormwater from that, a very large increase in stormwater. Our yards have dropped probably about a foot in the last 3 years because the waters that's coming down from the impervious surfaces are obviously causing a ruckus. What can you do? Now you're putting something even more impervious surfaces on the bottom of this hill. Where is all that water going to go? It's already there. Where is it going to go? Where else can it go? I understand that if you do a hydrologic study and you look at it and you say that there can be mitigation by planting native plants and the like, I haven't seen those positive effects on our end. You know, and that's a very large concern. The second is, for me in particular, is the neighborhood character. This is the gateway to our neighborhood. You drive down Gladstone, you get to the bottom of the hill, and you're driving through literally a nice green belt. Coming through the Civic Field complex. It's beautiful in there. It's very idyllic. And
About 30
exactly,
seconds.
as Emily said. What's that?
About 30 seconds.
Okay. The third, obviously, is the SEPA review. If you take the cap off this from 32 people and take the cap off, now all of a sudden it's completely open. Who is to say that 5 years, 10 years down the line, now we all of a sudden need even more houses, even more apartments? We build this thing up basically into another Regency, which we are dealing with in our backyard as well. You know, those are our concerns, and it's you know, I just wanted to say them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. So next on the list was Janice. Pardon me.
Good evening, Janice Marlega at 1509 St. Paul Street in Bellingham. I'm a long-term resident, almost 20 years, and property owner in the Puget neighborhood, and live near and drive and walk by the existing Lydia facility on a regular basis. Lydia Place is located at the entrance of a neighborhood of single-family residents and is very visible and is not secluded. I understand the need and appreciate the efforts of City and Lydia Place staff in addressing Bellingham's growing homeless problem, but I have concerns and question the size of the expansion plans proposed for the Gladstone site. Here are my comments regarding the proposed comprehensive plan amendment and rezone. In the project documents, it states that the site is basically undeveloped. Yes, the half of the property that is covered in forested wetland. The other half of the property is developed, and there's existing buildings, parking area, garden, play area. This site is only 1.4 acres, and only half of it is basically buildable. In the project documents that have been provided for review and comment, there are numerous inconsistencies in the number of studio apartments proposed and the total number of occupants, and how these numbers are called out. If we do not know what is being proposed, how do we know what we are commenting on? This information should be very clear so that we know what is being proposed and what is being planned to be built there. The current Bellingham Municipal Code for the Puget Neighborhood Table of Zoning Regulations includes the special regulations, under the special regulations is the following statement. Shelter for the homeless operated by a nonprofit organization shall be permitted in Area 6 with no more than 32 total occupants on not less than 62,000 square feet of land, and that 62,000 is the 1.4 acres. The proposed amendment to this code deletes the special regulation, which completely removes any cap on the number of total occupants per square foot of land. Without the cap, the property owners in this area will not be given the opportunity to comment on any future increases in the number of total occupants. Without the cap, what can the property owners in this area expect regarding future development on this site? Why was the cap removed? That's what I would like to know. Based on the Bellingham Code, how is a lot zoned as residential single able to add an apartment building to a site? Does the current zoning or proposed rezone in itself allow this change in use? And going through the code, that was not clear to me, and I would really appreciate clarification on that.
About 30 seconds, Janice.
Okay. How will parking be addressed? In the SEPA document, it states that there will only be 6 new trips per day. We were told that there would be an opportunity to comment on the parking requirements for the proposed expansion. When will this opportunity be provided? Gladstone Street was, from my observation, oversight of the facility appears to be inconsistent. And this is from walking up and down the street for the last 20 years. If the proposed expansion moves forward, how will the proposed facility be monitored? Will there be 24-hour supervision? And I brought a copy of my notes here, and I'd like to turn that in for the record.
Thank you. Did you bring just a single copy?
Pardon me?
Just a single copy?
Yeah, was I supposed to bring more than one?
No, that's okay. If you could just give it to Heather.
Yeah, and I did bring a copy of the aerial photo, but it was already put up there on the screen just to show that the site is developed.
Thank
The
you.
buildable portion is developed. It's not a vacant piece of land.
Okay, so next on the list are Tammy Thiel and then Steve Thiel. If either of you would like to speak. And then the last person on the list is Steve James. And again, if anyone else is here who didn't sign up, please, when Steve's finished, please just feel free to come down against the wall here and wait till he's done. Thank you. Tammy, go ahead. Sorry.
Hi there. Completely off the cuff. I'm Tammy Thiel. I'm at 1525 St. Paul Street. So we sit just behind Jeff over there. And first I want to say I really appreciate Emily and Schultze. Like, since you guys, I don't know if it's been since you took over or what has happened, I feel more of a kind of a cooperative tone from Lydia Place with the neighborhood. We've been there for probably 17 years, and it's the first I had a name connected, a contact over there, some type of thing like that. And so what we're kind of dealing with lately is we bought there knowingly. We knew this was part of our neighborhood, and we've had no issues until recently. A lot of cars being parked out in front, and a lot of maybe guys connected to the women staying there. And it's just lent an element of safety considerations. We have two high schoolers that park out front. We have them coming home at all times, and you never know who are these guys that we're dealing with. Because they become part of our, it's our neighborhood too. And it becomes a consideration. I don't really know if there's anyone over there kind of keeping an eye on this, and adding more people, I'm wondering how that would be managed. And then, like I said, it's just recently, and you've talked about the Greenbelt and all of that, but it feels like, oh, are the dads out there sleeping in there so that they can come around? I've seen some of the kids that come around, and it's just a concern. It just feels like we're not just dealing with the moms and kids. We're dealing with everything that comes with it. And I would just like that to be considered when we talk about expansion.
Thank you. Steve?
Good evening. I'm Steve Thiel, 1525 St. Paul Street. As my wife said, we've been residents in the neighborhood for 17, 18 years now, and respect and appreciate the work that Lydia Place is doing. And like she said, the relationship has been better in the last few years than it has been in the last 15 for sure. Our big concern, and mine personally, is witnessing how they're managing the other relationships, the men that are attached to the women and children at the home. In the past 2 years, we've seen an increase of cars parked directly across our house, men sleeping in the cars overnight for extended periods of 3 days, 7 days, working on these vehicles, walking the dog early in the morning, meeting these gentlemen coming out of the woods to go get into the car after they've slept in the woods and camp out there as well. We have 2 teenage daughters. It's a big concern having this element there, not knowing. The other difficult thing with their recent expansion to their parking lot, it seems it's not being utilized fully. There's still quite a bit of congestion on the streets. It's already a tight neighborhood with parking on just one side with very limited spaces, and for safety reasons, virtually none. Recently, the city added no parking signs up Gladstone, but parking that would extend that way blocked the streets. There were safety concerns about emergency vehicles, as well as Civic Field had events that blocked the street as well. But the combination of two, it's just a tight neighborhood for parking. The lots across the street on St. Paul from us are for sale. There'll be other houses going in. Street parking will be limited. My concern is about these new buildings going in and the cap as well, that's the others have brought up. That's a big issue. If this gets expanded beyond what we have now, I'm concerned where this parking is going to go, what it's going to do. We're concerned about stormwater and things and all these issues. my observation with these vehicles that have been parked right next to the stormwater drains is a significant amount of oil that's going off these older vehicles right into the streams. A pretty common thing. If you surveyed the area, you'd see quite a bit of this. Just something that we're observing and seeing as well. Those are our big concerns as neighbors there. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, Steve James.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Steve James. I live at 1372 Undine in the Puget neighborhood, a few blocks from the project. For full disclosure, some of you may know me as my role of on the Puget Neighborhood Board and also the president of the Puget Neighborhood Association. I am not here tonight to speak on behalf of the association, only to bring you our position is, on the Lydia Place project has been the same on any project in Puget neighborhood. We want to make sure that the person doing any development in the neighborhood has a legal right to do so. We want to make sure that the process is followed completely for that process to happen, and that citizens of the neighborhood have a chance to give their input about how they feel about the project, and I feel all of those things have happened here. So the only thing the board has discussed that is based on your decision, we may have to change our neighborhood plan, and we are willing to do that if that's so directed. Also, as a disclosure, some of you may know me in my role as a board member for Lydia Place, and some may think that's a conflict. I don't. I'm not here to speak on behalf of the board. I can never speak as clearly or as knowledgeably as Emily does about the problem of homelessness in Bellingham and how we're addressing it. So I defer to her in all ways and let you know that I, as a board member, support her. But I am here to speak to you as a citizen and a human being. I had the pleasure of working many years with the presiding judge of the Municipal Court of Santa Barbara County. And as an adjudicator, I remember one time he was telling me that every now and then you get to hear a case or you get to hear a set of facts that it's just clear what the right thing to do is. And even though you have to make a decision that may make some people happy and some people unhappy or displeased, it's clear what the right thing to do is. And I'm here to simply say that you guys are faced with one of those decisions now. What Lydia Place is trying to do, and I say this as a citizen of Bellingham, as a human being, is just the right thing to do in this time, in this place. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, is there anyone else who didn't sign up who'd like to make a comment on this? Okay, see no one, we will close the public hearing comment period for this. And I'd like to say thank you to everybody who spoke and appreciate those of you who wrote letters also taking the time to come down and speak to us in person. And I think with that, we will move into staff response and then come to Planning Commission discussion, just in case there's anything that, Kurt, you'd like to say.
Sure, I can definitely follow up on some of the things. I think one of the main things that I heard tonight from the public testimony is, well, there's a couple things. First of all, that things have improved over the recent years. So I think that shows that there's a commitment from the Lydia Place staff to address issues when they do arise. So I think that's really important. One of the other things that I heard is that there are more people, more cars and such living there. And I think that's a direct correlation to the numbers that Emily presented tonight. I believe it was a 75% increase in unsheltered of individuals. And so the reason that those people are potentially the reason that those people are living there or parking there is because they don't have a place to go. One of the things that this proposal does is it tries to provide more options for these folks, more permanent options. That we know that housing for individuals is a key component in their success in their lives. So being able to provide more housing in the spot is really important. As you can see from the facts. There were some comments tonight regarding changes to the special regulations in the zoning table. As I noted, that is in your packet. And specifically, one of the things that we looked at was there was a current occupant load, 32, no more than 32 people per 62,000 square feet of land. One of the things that we realize is that because this is transitional home housing, there may be a mother and a child that comes in. There may be a mother and 3 children that come in, a mother and 4 children. So we need to be able to provide the flexibility for the folks that are coming into it, and having that cap can really limit that opportunity and the potential to help some of these folks out. So staff believes that not having that cap there is a good idea. It allows more flexibility in being able to provide services for these folks that need it. There were some comments about the site being developed and undeveloped. Yes, it is clearly, it's a developed site. There is undeveloped portions of the site that are still out there. Those undeveloped portions are wetlands, and they would not be developed in the future most likely. Again, there will be opportunity for public comment because if this is to go forward, they do have to go through a design review process. There would be a critical area permit associated with as well. All of that allows for public comment opportunity on the specifics. The SEPA that was done for this it's known as a non-project SEPA determination, so we don't look at the individual impacts associated with the specific development. We look at it from a much higher perspective, knowing that additional SEPA review could be required based on the type of development. Again, any development that could come here is obviously going to go through all of our adopted codes and development regulations, including stormwater. We do have a pretty high standard of stormwater regulations in our city, and this project, just like every other project that's built in Bellingham, has to go through those rules and process. I think that generally covers most of the comments I heard. Maybe Emily would like to talk a little bit about the management style and philosophy that they bring forward with this.
Sure, if that would be helpful. There are sort of hard to know where to start. These families come to us with significant barriers in front of them, and that creates some challenges all around. It's also really hard, if you can imagine, one, being homeless and trying to figure out how to take care of your kids while living in a car or on a tent, and children trying to figure out how to have stability and do good in school, and meet their developmental milestones when they're not sure where they're going to sleep or where they're going to eat or whether they're going to be safe that night. So these are the kinds of situations that families are entering our facilities from. And then in addition to that, they're entering a facility where they have to share a house with 7 other families with all sorts of problems of their own and parenting styles and struggles. So that creates a very tricky environment, and we acknowledge that. At the same time, these, again, are our community's most vulnerable families. These are the families who don't have anywhere else to go. And if we didn't own this resource as a community and dedicate it this way, they literally are sleeping in cars and on the street. And sometimes challenges arise in terms of management where we'll have a family breaking the rules for whatever reason. And at the end of the day, what I have to live with when people say, well, why aren't you asking them to leave? Why aren't you kicking them out? And when I'm looking at an infant and their 5-year-old sister, I have to make a decision about where that child and that infant are going to sleep that night. And so there's a delicate balance between being compassionate and being strict and understanding the real consequences for real children in our community. And these are the children who we don't want isolated. We don't want them isolated. We don't want them spread where they don't have community support. We don't want them out in the county where there's no community around them. We actually need our neighbors to step up and help us support them. We need them to contact us when they hear something or see something that isn't okay. We actually need this community to rally around these families and to have them here within our immediate grasp, so that they can be safe and that they can be protected. And so I recognize that that is also sometimes a challenge and a burden, but it's one that we just have to we have to take on. And so with Lydia Place, we really welcome our neighbors' input. We encourage them to contact us and to reach out. We are not staffed 24 hours a day. We'd love to be. We simply can't afford it. that's just the reality of the social service world at the moment. But that means that there are, although we have security cameras and other measures in place and 24-hour on-call staff, there are times when we don't see things that our neighbors might see. And so that relationship is really important to us. And also, again, it comes with some challenges. So we're dedicated to being really responsive and to really communicating and partnering with our neighbors. And we recognize and validate the concerns that they have. And at the same time, these are things that are happening throughout our community. These aren't problems that are specific to the homeless population or to this neighborhood. We have parents who struggle throughout our communities and homeless people who are sleeping in cars and tents and on our stream corridors everywhere. So it's a community issue, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We may have questions for both of you, but I think we should just open up opportunity for discussion. Steve, you want to take us away?
I've got a ton of them.
All right, well, why don't you start with-
And let someone else talk for a
That,
little bit.
that's a good idea. But let's hear your thoughts.
Okay, according to the packet on page 2, the finances for expansion have not been attained as of yet. Kurt, why is this coming before us now and not waiting for this project to be totally funded, designed, so we know what we're voting on tonight?
We are not allowed to ask for funding if we do not have the zoning approval. So we cannot apply for funding. So,
Well, it's listed, you got 2 pendings, 2 amounts of money pending in this year.
not for this project. We don't have any funding, nor have we requested funding for this project, and we're told we cannot do that for any public dollars unless we have the development rights.
Kurt, would you explain on page 2, line 32, what that means, please?
Yeah, this is additional funding that goes to Lydia Place and the services. So Lydia Place does receive other funding from the city and other federal agencies. So this money is already being allocated to them to perform other services, not
It has
this
nothing to
project.
do with expansion.
Not this one, no.
Are they funded to do expansion?
No, I think what Emily was trying to say is that they can't get funding through their different sources without having appropriate zoning in place. Very typical for any sort of development to try to get funding for something that the zoning doesn't allow. Obviously, any lender is not going to want to be doing that.
Why aren't you applying for a conditional use permit, vice a rezone here? Why is that not in play tonight?
One of the reasons that we didn't go down that route is that a conditional use doesn't necessarily give all the flexibility that may come with a zoning designation. One, this use has been in place for over 25 years, so it's not going anywhere. And when the application came forward, staff met with them and felt that this was the more appropriate process. It actually is a higher level of review and public opportunity. And through this process, there's actually 2 public hearings, and the city council gets to make the decision on this. That allows them to weigh many factors, the public comment that they hear, as well as the comprehensive plan. To do a conditional use permit, it's a much more quasi-judicial type of setting. The city council does not get to weigh in on this. The public only has one opportunity to comment. So we felt that this provided more opportunity for the public to engage in the process and also allow the city council to make the final decision on it.
Just real quick, on that topic, what's the use, what would it be? Is it a service care facility in the code, or what would it be if it was? Because I asked the same question in my head, and I was thinking maybe there isn't a conditional use in the residential single zone that it could fit into.
There really isn't specifically called out there that I can recall. It's not really service care. It's kind of one of those in-between uses. And when you've got those in-between uses, sometimes it's more challenging to try to plug that into a use that's in our existing zoning code. Again, the zoning gives more permanence, if you will, to it. It's been zoned this way and used this way for many, many years, and we felt that it was the appropriate way to move it forward.
One of my last statements here is that I think that all the way through this packet, we have totally ignored the rights of a single-family housing neighborhood to enjoy quiet and legal enjoyment of their houses. Somehow, this has been all glassed over here because of the need, and I understand the need, but I also understand that the residents out there have the right, have the legal right for quiet enjoyment. We've received 2 letters, and we heard, 5 people here tonight talking about it does not exist. It does not exist now with 8 residents and their families. And to double that amount, how can you say it does not impact the general health, safety, welfare of this community?
I'm not going to say that it doesn't impact. Clearly, whenever you have, whether it's a single family, a new development going next to you, there's change. We won't, I'll agree with you, there is impact. The criteria doesn't say just because there's impact, you shouldn't move forward. The criteria looks at it from a much higher perspective than that. Some of our design standards, also the process that they go forward, ensure that the proposed design of the building is compatible with the neighborhood character. That's a standard design review criteria. I think one of the other things to really think about here is that it is somewhat secluded. It's been mentioned that it's the entry point into the neighborhood. It depends on what you consider the neighborhood. For these folks that are living in this general area, it is an entry point, but it's also surrounded by 2 sides without any development. So I think that that's something to think about here. The big thing here is that there's an existing use that's occurring here. It's been occurring here for a long time. Part of our strategy in dealing with population growth, obviously with our community, is efficient use of land. This is efficient use of land. We've got an existing use that's there already. There's room available to allow for an increase here, and it supports that. So from that perspective, we believe that the needs and the desires here are something that should be considered and overall meets the criteria. I think it was Mr. James said tonight that it's the right thing to do, and staff believes that it's not only the right thing to do, but it also meets the criteria in which to do it, and that's very important there. If you don't feel that, the Planning Commission has the ability to discuss changes to the findings that would support your opinions and views.
The slide that was shown on the wall that showed 6 yellow boxes on the property, is that the general proposed new building sites of these 8 to 11 units?
That would be the general proposal, but that's not. What we needed was a sort of a basic footprint to take to the wetland biologist so that they could really evaluate impact on the wetland. And so that is not a final design or plan. It was basically a square footage map so that she could do some calculations about what might be feasible.
Yeah, real quick, and I'll finish up here. The location of those, they're actually closer to the residents. That it's removing that buffer. You're right across the street from Pat Cruz, and you're right across the street from the Jacobys. You are actually closer.
Correct.
Could cause more problems if, in fact, that footprint is very closely used. So you can't keep saying that we got buffers and we only get stuff on 3 sides, because that's not happening. That's not happening.
Yep, and we acknowledge that there absolutely will be an impact.
Jeff, you had a comment?
Actually, I have a question. It's interesting. It's all coagulating around this. Before that, though, I should note, just for the Planning Commission members, when I saw the presentation, I realized I have an indirect connection to this, but I don't believe it affects, it's a material effect on the discussion, so I'm not going to recuse myself.
Thank you.
I guess my question, my understanding is this would be an outright permitted use then, and really the multifamily design review process is dealing with a structure, not so much off-site impacts that you would normally have a conditional use process. Is that correct? You're looking at the design standards for the building itself when a project comes forward, right?
That's correct. There's site design components associated with it. We also look at lighting and other factors associated with parking. We do look at landscaping, buffering. Those things are all part of our design standards. So
They're the site.
Correct. It's not just the building. It's the site as well as the building.
So this is actually a facility. It's an operation. And so there are other impacts that have been noted by the neighborhood in terms of upstreet impacts of people parking and being attracted to the facility and not necessarily being users of the facility that you would have no control over in a multifamily design review process, but in a conditional use process, you would set operating, you'd have operating standards or mitigating conditions for operating a facility in a single-family neighborhood that might address some of those other issues. I'm just trying to get my head around, we're kind of going from a process here where it's an outright permitted use, and then it's a done deal. We do the zoning. It's all in your hands to design to set the facility standards for the site. It doesn't come back to us. Versus a conditional use where there is actually consideration of off-site impacts of the operation itself and how to mitigate those on surrounding neighbors. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out. Am I clear on this? Is that actually the difference?
Yes and no. The existing use is a permitted use there now. They can continue operation and they can have up to 32 people there now. No rules, no nothing. It's allowed. It's been that way since 1990 with some updates in 1995. So it's not a new permitted use. It is the use in itself is getting larger in a different form from a individual building with a whole bunch of bedrooms to a more permanent and what we would hope to deliver as a more stable service for some of these folks. So the use is permitted now and can continue now for up to 32 people there. Even with a conditional use, I don't think we could condition it that would prohibit people from parking on the street. That's just not a realistic condition that we would ever impose on any sort of rule or development. It's something that we just couldn't enforce. So it's not likely to have that. As we look at the overall proposed use here, we do look at those offsite impacts. So we've considered that. The parking lot has been expanded already there. We think that there is opportunities to work with the neighborhood on those types of issues. So those types of issues are going to come with just about any type of use. They come with a single-family neighbor. I've said this before, you can't choose your neighbors. Even if it was a single-family zoning, you could have other things, lots of impact from people that are living there. That's the reality of it. The site in itself could be developed with more single-family homes than it is now. So Lydia Place could move from here and it could potentially be developed into additional single-family homes. With that, it comes with its own set of issues and change for the neighborhood. Again, the staff believes that it meets a critical need. We believe that its location is actually beneficial. It's not truly in the neighborhood. It's on the outskirts as you come in. And again, we're acknowledging that there is the potential for change here. That's something that we have to live with and look at the need. Truly, this is a community need, and it's something that's very important. And we believe that tied with the efficient use of the existing land makes sense.
Well, I don't think anybody's arguing that there's the need. I think I think everybody's supportive of the concept. I think the issue is you have a facility that is undergoing an expansion that will have no cap on it, and how do you set conditions to protect the rest of the neighborhood. And maybe you can't control parking, but maybe you could require 24-hour, 7-day, 24-hour use once it's expanded and you actually have that, 50 people there and no overnight supervision or whatever. I guess, how is that getting dealt with? And, maybe a service contract with the city as part of a grant is one way to do that, but another way is to actually have conditions set for operating a facility of that magnitude in a single-family zone. And I think that's the concern that I'm getting here, is that somehow by just having it being fully permitted use, having it be multifamily design review, never comes back here, never comes back to council. It's a done deal. You now have essentially a larger operation operating in a single-family neighborhood, and it's done. So I'll leave it at that.
Did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I guess generally, because we already have 428 different zoning designations in the city, I don't like to mention this, but as part of this, there is the ability to place additional conditions on this through the approval process. Again, generally that is not something that we would suggest because all you're doing is you're making the zoning much more difficult to actually administer from our perspective, but you have that opportunity to require conditions. Maybe one of the conditions is that there's an operational plan that deals with safety considerations. Maybe it's something broad enough like that that allows Lydia Place to create or expand their existing operational plan to try to address some of those services.
Go ahead.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was a question I was going to have, of whether or not we could stipulate something additional to this. So in reading everything and then listening to the residents around the area, I was pulling away that the cap is a big concern, the management, especially overnight, and maybe unintended guests around, and also parking. And I think those things can be worked out. I know that the current cap is the 32, and you don't want to necessarily have a cap because you don't want to turn away a mom because she has 3 kids and you only have space for 3 people under your cap. But if you could look at something as far as adults, because if you have 8 rooms and you're looking at 8 to 11 more rooms, I think there's a concern that if we just open up the lid 4 years from now, you're going to build another 3, or you're going to expand into a 2 or 3 story or whatever would be allowed, because there is a stronger need. So if we looked at a cap based on adult residents, that way you're not limiting how many children may be there, that might ease some of the concern about future development going beyond. I think that would be a very valid request to make. I don't want to necessarily on the fly say your cap must say this, but if you come back, or if you want to do it on the fly now and say this was what would be reasonable, I would like to request that. Management, if you do end up with 20 adults and maybe each one has 2 to 3 kids, you do have a lot of people there to manage, and there will be situations with disruptions. And so I think it would be very reasonable to look for grants to be able to have 24-hour or overnight or periodic supervision in the evenings and weekends where there may be those concerns, and even partnering with other agencies that do have that level of case management or internships through various doctorate or master programs where people need to have service hours. I mean, there's a lot of creativity you could come up with in order to address that. And I do think maybe having like a management plan written in that says this is something that they're going to be pursuing as part of their expansion. Parking, work with the city. Ever since because I walk that area, ever since that road improvement came in and that sidewalk went in, you do have the people parking. And I don't necessarily want to say everybody who's parking in that area is affiliated with a resident, because we do have a large homeless population. You just go over to Civic Field, because I walk 5 in the morning, you see all the people camping out. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're part of Lydia Place, but just make sure that if they are somehow connected, is some kind of outreach so that they're not necessarily creating an undue and unneeded impact. And if this does go through, I certainly hope that you really consider like extra installation and other mitigation so that it reduces the noise, because you are getting much closer to those residents. And so I would certainly hope, because if we don't have a design review for the building where we can later go and say, unless we can put it in now, but that there needs to be certain standards with those buildings in order to help mitigate that kind of noise disruption that's going to impact those neighbors. I personally do not appreciate being woken up at 2 in the morning with people who are drunk going up and down my road, but I have the hotels over in my area, so I have my own little impacts. So just a few 2 cents, I might add something later, but I'm glad you mentioned that we could maybe tweak this a little bit and address some of that.
Thank you, Lisa. Phyllis?
Kurt, how many houses are down, further down the road past Lydia Place? Do we know approximately?
I don't know specifically, but we do have a map that we can try and look. Definitely not the greatest, but you can see you've got, obviously houses through here, and then they wrap around this way as well.
And that's point out St. Paul, where the residents spoke tonight?
St. Paul is this one right here. This is Gladstone.
Do we have any residents that are further to the east who have expressed concern?
I'm not aware of anybody.
Do these people know who to call if there is an issue at night? Are they given phone numbers, the neighbors?
Our information is public, and then with the neighbor, we do some outreach regularly
Good.
with our neighbors. We go door to door sometimes, and then we engage in.
Emily, can you turn your microphone, please?
Right, sorry. So we do try and make every opportunity to have that information available to them. There's email addresses. We had email correspondence with neighbors, phone calls with neighbors. So they have reached out to us and continue to reach out to us when they have a concern, which is great. So I don't know that everybody in there knows exactly the number to call without using Google, but yes.
If somebody does reach out to you, are they usually satisfied with the results, or is this they get to the point where they just don't bother anymore?
Well, I think you'd have to ask them directly, and
Right.
and I've been here for 4 years, and so I can only speak for my experience with those neighbors, which has been really great, and certainly not without their frustrations, and we try really hard to address those. Most recently, we had a couple of neighbors who were concerned because the moms wouldn't take the garbage off the street in a timely manner, and so we adjusted that and put in a dumpster on the other side of the property in the parking lot. Checked back in with our neighbors about that, and they said it's been great, it's been awesome. The crows and squirrels haven't been bugging the garbage can. So that's the type of relationship we try to have. And again, we have 2 neighbors who are directly across the street from us. So Jeff Jacoby, who spoke earlier, and then our 2 who aren't here tonight. And so we certainly have regular conversations with them when they have concerns about things. But as you can sort of see here, there's not that many houses that are immediately adjacent to the property.
I know when I read this, it's nice to sort of speak last because everybody says what I was thinking. But I've had these concerns about the neighbors. I'm very sensitive to that. We've been dealing with the comprehensive plan for the city. That's a big issue. And, people who have certain anticipations of what their neighborhood's going to be like when they buy the house and all of a sudden things change. I mean, that's definitely something we've been dealing with. So I just want to make sure we're not finding ourselves promoting something that we're going to regret. But I'm so in favor of what Lydia House does, so there's this dichotomy. But I'd like to, as Lisa was saying, I'd love to see something in place that allowed working with the neighbors so that they're not the ones just picking up the burden. And it's not just, well, the neighbors are, going to get tired of complaining. I just want to make sure that we don't regret that down the line. And you think that's probably not going to happen? That we're going to regret approving this if we do?
I would hope that we would never regret building housing for homeless mothers and children. And I recognize that it's a tricky issue. Again, we recognize that it does have an impact on our neighbors. And I just want to stress that as an organization who owns this property, given what we're seeing in the community, the real tragedies that we're seeing in the community, we felt an obligation to bring this before you and say, what is the right decision for our community? What's the most important thing here to do? Is it to preserve, what we have going on and not impact those neighbors who are here this evening, or is it to try and figure out collectively how we solve this crisis that we have on our hands? I understand that that's a complex question, and at the end of the day, we're here because it's up to all of you to decide whether or not that's the right thing to do. We felt an obligation as a nonprofit and as an organization that's trying to help homeless families in our community to evaluate whether or not this was something that our community wanted to do. So the last thing we want to do is upset our neighbors. This is not a fun thing to do, let me tell you. We love our neighbors, and we need the support of this community in order to do the work that we do. We cannot do our work without this community. And so it's a tough thing for us to do, to sort of spend this social capital and raise this issue, knowing that there are people who do not want us to do this. But we have children sleeping in cars and infants growing up in cars, and it's not okay. And there has to be a point where we say we actually are going to take some steps forward to do something about it. And if we don't do it here, where do we do it? And who steps up to do that? So anyway, Mike.
I have another question. When we make these facilities available to, I understand the criteria might be whatever criteria you have. Do you happen to know how many people are from this area as opposed to how many people may be coming into this area?
Yes, we do.
Good.
So not only for our facilities, but for all of the homeless individuals in Bellingham, we do a big point-in-time count every year. Correct me if this is not what you're asking me, but the folks who are homeless in Bellingham, I think 80% of them, their last previous residence was in Bellingham. And of all of the families that we end up serving in our housing programs, because of course we can't get to everyone, I think the latest number was 90% of those who we serve in our housing programs are our neighbors. They're our Whatcom County residents. So
because the more attractive we become, the more the word passes.
This is not an attractive community with regard to homelessness. I mean, as we've mentioned, we are woefully short on resources. So I don't see the appeal to come and get in line here. But
right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tom?
Can I ask one of my silly Norwegian questions?
Of course.
You stated that the parking lot has been expanded. Does it have the capacity to accept 11 additional dwelling units now, or will the parking lot itself have to be expanded?
It's my understanding that it's built that for additional capacity of those units. Obviously, when any new additional units were proposed here, they would have to meet the standard parking requirements for whatever type of unit that's developed. So it would meet the code.
Okay. I like what Lisa said about some kind of operational thing where the number of adults would be carved in stone. You have 7 families now?
8.
8. So another 11 would be 19. And if I use or push to the extreme and say 19 families of 4 people each, 1 adult and 3 kids, that's about 76 people, and currently you're capped at 32. You're more than doubled. And you know, that's an extreme example, but what I'm getting at is you're doubling the impact to the neighbors, at least. So anything that we can do as far as putting in this this rezone for the operational thing, you know, so they have 24-hour management of the on-site. I think would make it much more palatable to the close neighbors.
Thanks, Tom. Garrett, comment? I have a couple questions. Do you have a set of rules and regulations for your tenants now?
Yes.
And how do you present those to new people that you bring in? Like, what's your introduction process when someone new comes to your facility?
Yes, so we are part of our coordinated entry system for homelessness, which means that anybody who comes to our facility is referred to us through the Whatcom Homeless Service Center at the Opportunity Council. And so what that has done in recent years is really prioritize who's the highest need, most vulnerable household. So we don't maintain our own waiting list. They are referred to us. And they've already at that point gone through an intake and a screening process, income eligibility, some of those pieces. They come to us then, and we do our own intake and screening process. And then, you know, give them a tour of the facility and really talk about what the program requirements are. It's not something that everybody is up for or can agree to. And so we try and be as careful and cognizant of that as we can up front. And then they have orientation meetings with the housing program coordinator. They also get assigned to a housing case manager, and then our parent support team as well. And so in each of those, they're going through additional pieces about what's required for participation in the program.
And do they, is there like a code of conduct?
Yes.
And did people have to sign on to that?
They have to sign, and
I know,
then...
like you said, you can't, you know, you have to make that balanced judgment of, are we going to kick out a family if they break the rules? But I'm just curious if they actually are forced to go through that process.
Absolutely are, and
Make an
then we
affirmative
put them on
commitment.
what we call contracts if they are violating one of the program rules. So we'll sort of have, you know, one-on-one conversations with them. If it continues to be an issue, we'll put them on a written contract. And then we certainly have asked people to leave. You know, we don't like to do that, but sometimes there's no other alternative. And again, it really is about, you know, is it that they didn't take the trash in, or they're not cleaning up after themselves in the kitchen? Those are hard things to ask somebody to leave for. But when it's something that's really endangering the safety of the other folks in the house, and they're not willing to engage around that, if it's a problem of substance abuse, et cetera, then we would ask them to leave. Or if they are, and this has happened before, if they have a partner or an ex who is not a safe person and who isn't able to keep their different distance from the facility, having to make some...
And do you guys have like a set of visitation rules or specific rules related to that?
Yes, guests are not allowed at the facility except when staff are present. So we do have security cameras, and we check those regularly, and oftentimes we'll see things that we then have to address. Some things we don't see, certainly. But yes, we do have all of those as well. Okay, and then another question I had was, how much does it cost Lydia Place annually to house a family? To like, for you to fully provide all the services you provide to a family, can you give me like an average of how much it costs you as a nonprofit to do that? Depends on the program that they're in and the services that they're providing, so it's really hard to give you a rough estimate. Because they might be getting services from other organizations that like help them? Yes, and some families, so we serve about 225, we have about 225 housing placements at a time, 8 of which are these mothers in the transitional housing units. We have a partnership with Bellingham Housing Authority. We have 79 apartments there. So for us, the cost there is not housing. We aren't paying for rent. We're just doing the case management and supportive services. And then we also work a lot with community landlords. So
What about specifically at this facility?
this facility costs us about $120,000 a year to operate.
So that's for like 8 families?
That's for the 8 families, yes.
And that's all your costs,
Correct.
like staff and everything?
Yes.
Have you guys done any budgeting for what it's going to cost you to operate the new facility
So we have.
per family?
We have not, and the reason is that we don't want to get too far down the road in terms of devoting resources to a project that may not be feasible for one of a variety of reasons. This being only the first step, there are other feasibility considerations here, some of which we've discussed tonight. And so with the resource scarcity that we have, we just can't devote resources to some of those questions until we know whether we can even consider it.
Gotcha.
So I apologize, I can't give you a good answer to that.
No, that's okay. I'm just trying to get my head around some of the kind of the functional issues that we've been talking about and get some more data on that. Garrett, Phyllis?
Do you find that this is successful? Are you finding that people are going out and becoming productive citizens after
Yes.
a brief stay at Lydia House?
Not all of them are successful.
Oh, I can imagine
The vast
that.
majority are. We have some really amazing people who you might meet if you are in the right spot, who can tell you some amazing stories about coming through that program and how it changed their lives. There's countless of those, as we have been here for nearly 27 years and have served hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of families through that facility. So this a large success rate. And because the need is ever increasing in this community, the individuals that we are serving have more and more challenges. And so as that has happened over the years, it has become more expensive to provide these services and more challenging to provide these services.
Why do you think this has increased recently, the need?
I think there's a variety of factors, and this is something that isn't unique to Whatcom County. It's not unique to our state. It's across the country, but certainly we are seeing a big rise of homelessness in Whatcom County, and we do have a housing shortage here. Our case managers, for example, who have pots of rental subsidy that historically they use with private landlords, so they find any fair market housing and provide a rental subsidy and in-home support. We're now having a hard time spending those rental subsidies because there are so few vacancies, and when there is a vacancy, it's gone within 12 hours. Landlords get 50 to 100 applicants per unit. It's very hard to find housing, and the housing that we are finding and are able to secure is incredibly expensive, and so that's got a big impact. And the large chunk of families who are living right on that margin are being pushed even further and are losing their housing more frequently because housing has become that much more expensive. And then it's harder to rehouse them, and it's more expensive to rehouse them. So all of that is just sort of converging into this little storm that we have going on.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Can I just ask one more of these kind of operational questions real quick? What are your current staff hours on the facility?
Our staff are there generally 40 hours a week, 40 plus, depending. We do groups on Thursday evenings as well.
So I mean, like in a 24-hour period, what period of that day is there someone from Lydia Place staff on site?
Usually about 8 to 5.
8 to 5?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we have 24-hour staff coverage, so we're able to respond if there is either the residents call us if there's some sort of emergency, facility issue, those kinds of things as well.
Is your staff paid, or are they volunteer?
Well, we certainly rely very heavily on volunteers, but these
Sure.
are paid staff we're talking about now.
So are you paying people to be on call?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
If in fact you get the rezone and the comp plan amendment, what are you planning to do differently when you double your population that you are not doing now?
Well, looking at staff coverage is one of the things that we'll have to really think about.
Staff what?
Staff coverage at the facility. Certainly, when you have twice as many people, you're going to have additional things that come up, both between residents and externally. And so, evaluating what the right level of staffing is a big piece of that. And I'm not sure exactly what that will end up looking like, but yes, staff coverage is one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle. It's really, the times when it's tricky are the times when nobody is there to respond.
Well, it seems to me that's one of the biggest problems that the
Absolutely.
neighborhood is facing right now. I know at some of these self-storage places, a unit is given to a couple to manage it, no rent, but they manage the self-storage facility. I think there are programs to get some people there 24/7. And I think that's what is desperately needed if in fact you proceed with 11 more units. And I'll bring this up later as far as an operational plan. I think that there should be an operational plan inserted with this, with some of the things Lisa had talked about. And I'll step aside right now.
I think those are great thoughts on this kind of on-site management issue. Garrett, did you have comments?
Well, I support the rezone. I think it's an essential service for our community. I think what we're talking about doing is intensifying a non-conforming use in a neighborhood, and I think that that intensification needs to be mitigated. And I think any rezone approval should be conditioned with the requirement for an organizational master plan that addresses and helps mitigate some of these issues about visitation, parking, operation. And I think it should be concomitant to the rezone, and maybe in the form of a covenant, a restriction that's placed on the property, on title. So like a CC&R that describes the operations, what the management plan is, and is binding in perpetuity.
I have a question for Kurt. Can you do something like that through a design review permit approval? Can you impose conditions on the operations of a business or nonprofit through a design review permit? Because I know you can impose conditions on the design. You can say you must have a screening hedge, you must have lighting that doesn't have spillover onto the neighbor's property. You know, getting to Jeff's question, I deal with design review all the time, and the city looks at off-site issues. Like, I can tell you, my clients mitigate off-site issues through design review all the time, whether it's lighting or access points or parking impacts. And you have neighborhood meetings, so the city absorbs the feedback from the concerned neighbors, and then typically, when you submit your application, those concerns get addressed through that. But I'm wondering regarding operational elements, I personally am very comfortable with design review handling things like lighting and parking, and because I've seen it before. But this other element,
I don't have the code in front of me, obviously.
Yeah. I'm just
I
thinking, have you ever done
don't
that?
believe that we would have the authority to do that. I mean, honestly, when you look at the criteria for design review, it's really geared towards the site design and the building design. Maybe through SEPA, if they have to go through SEPA because of potential impacts to wetland buffers or something like that, then maybe that's some mechanism that we could do that. But through the design review approval, I don't think so.
I ask that because I think that what everybody's getting at, and Garrett, it's a new suggestion for me, but I think it's a good one. And I think what Jeff got at is that the design review, I don't like the idea of putting a lot of detail in a rezone into the neighborhood zoning table. I don't like that. I think you're right, what you said earlier. But if there's no other opportunity to capture this, we're not doing a CUP. I personally participated in the conditional use permit process for an expansion of a halfway house in Bellingham last year. And it's not the same, but it was a very similar dynamic. That expansion was very worrisome for the immediate neighbors, particularly in regards to safety and parking and impacts from the additional, we doubled the capacity. And we had the conditional use permit process, and the hearing examiner imposed very specific conditions, including things like you must have an operations plan that's available to the city for review. You must do this. You must have 24-hour staff. And those were implemented through a conditional use permit. We don't have that. The reason I'm asking about design review is because if that opportunity is not there, this might be the only, while it's not ideal to put it in a zoning table, and that's why your idea is, I think, is a good one, because it doesn't really put the details in the comp plan. But this may be our only opportunity to condition some of those operational elements. I don't know.
A design review is not going to capture the issues that the neighborhood's bringing up.
It'll capture some of them.
Some of them.
But not all.
But not the operational aspects. And I don't think it's unreasonable. I think of it more of like an institutional master plan. If this zoning, they're providing social services, so it's more of an institutional design than it is, just simply housing. The nature of the work being performed there is more institutional. And that could be conditioned on a rezone. A rezone could be conditioned upon receiving an organizational master plan to be reviewed concurrently, could it not?
Yeah, I mean, you have the ability to make recommendations, and you can condition, add findings to that, support adding conditions associated. I am hesitant to get into the details of what those requirements now, because obviously we're trying to get the land use enablement kind of there for them to start working on the details of it. So I wouldn't want to fine tune that right now, but maybe some parameters. That's something that you could do if you so choose.
Should we pen this for your response at our next meeting?
No, I think, I think what Kurt's saying is to leave it, not to get overly prescriptive with all the mitigating factors, but to address the need for such a document and that a general outline of what it should address. And then it should go, that would be reviewed by the city, and I think they're more than capable of handling that kind of review.
Yeah, I agree. I do think 24-hour on-site management is something that should be really strongly considered. I know, Emily, that you said that we can't afford it. And when you look at, that's why I asked questions about your budget. When you say it costs $120,000 to operate, and you say, okay, we're going to add 24-hour management to our existing situation, that is a significant increase in cost. But if you're going to say we're going to add 11 units and they're going to cost $15,000 each a year for us to manage, well, I'd rather see 9 units and someone paid $30,000 a year to be on site. And I think that's, when you say you can't afford it, it's really like a balance. Like, we need to balance these neighborhood concerns with your mission, which is so important. And maybe, maybe it's a sacrifice that you have to make where you get a lot, but you give something, and you don't get everything you want because you assign some of your budget to deal with these issues. I just think that that's a critical, I agree, we don't need to get into the weeds, but that to me is a super critical. It sounds like if someone was there at 10 at night, people might not be having their boyfriends park out front or make tons of noise or not deal with a loud kid. Who knows? Maybe not, but it seems like that would be a major deterrent to bad behavior.
Absolutely. I think the one challenge is that budgets fluctuate year to year, and we have to make adjustments. So securing development funding is one element, and then your ongoing operational budget year over year is a different component. And so when that's required without any funding to go along with it for an indefinite period of time, it doesn't allow for, what do you do when when a grant falls through and you have to make some adjustments to that? So that's my only hesitation. I agree with you. 24-hour staffing would be ideal and warranted in this situation. And I think there's the reality that nonprofits operate in, which is a little bit less certain than that.
Sure.
And so it's that flexibility is the only
You do
piece.
have a cost of doing business, though, annually, and if
Yes.
that was a line item in your cost of doing business, then that would be the first thing you consider, and then whatever extra money you have, you would put toward your services. And I know that's not ideal, but that's better than nothing, I guess, is what I'm saying. And so you could, even in a down year, you could say, well, we still have to do this. Are we going to have to sacrifice some services this year and go out to our donor pool and say, hey, we have this thing we have to do to operate here. Can we ask you to help us more? Lisa?
And I don't necessarily think you'd have to have 24-hour management. You have overnight. And if
Yeah.
you take one of the residential units and someone has free rent and board, that would help offset the cost. And because of labor laws and stuff, they're not going to work 7 days a week. But even if you had 5 nights and, Friday, Saturday, Sunday being required, because that's usually when things would pitch up, I would assume, or identify what those days are, and you have someone on site who helps take care of that, I think that would definitely lessen the cost overall. And that might be a really great opportunity for someone who kind of moves on from your program successfully and, has a good employment opportunity and housing provided. And I don't think it would be extremely cost prohibitive. And, I think it'd be very beneficial.
Absolutely.
Strive for that 11 units, providing 10 of which to the transitional housing and 1 for an on-site manager for evening hours.
Another thing that I know we don't want to get into the details, but there's really simple things you can do. To just falling back on that experience I had last year, one of the requirements at that halfway house facility was that they put a big sign out on the curb with their phone number. And it says in big letters, if you are having any problems with people at this facility, this is the number you call. And every single person who walks by on the street, you said you don't know if everybody knows your number, they have to Google it. You put a sign out front with the number on it, they'll know your number. So there's really, that could be part of this kind of operational plan, working with SEPTED, understanding those things. And it seems like there could be little things, cheap little things that could be done to help with these issues.
Well, I'll state this in form of a motion, and we could have more discussion about it. I move to approve the rezone request as written in the staff report, and then further modify it, requiring an organizational master plan that addresses some of the impacts of on-site management, parking, visitation, noise, curfew, and that be concurrent with the rezone and concomitant to the rezone.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Okay. It's going to be very difficult for me to restate that.
Friendly amendment?
Let's wait till we get, technically I should try and restate this, but do you want to restate it? Sorry.
Yeah, support the rezone request, and that conditioned with the rezone that the Lydia Place provides an organizational management master plan that addresses some of the impacts of on-site management, parking, visitation, noise, curfew, and that document's concomitant to the rezone and recorded on title.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Thank you. Lisa.
Could you please add a cap for adult residents in with that?
Okay, so
Would that be accomplished?
I think that would be an amendment, a motion to amend. So do you want to make that now as a motion to amend?
I motion to amend by adding a cap for adult residents.
Second.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second to amend the original motion to add a cap. And just to clarify, would that be adding a cap to the zoning table explicitly like the current rule state, or contemplating a cap within the kind of organizational planning document that Garrett's speaking of?
I think to the table, and I do not want to specify what that cap would be. I would like you to have the discussion with planning so that you have a little bit of leeway, but also to help. I mean, the purpose of it is to take care of the concern that we're not going to end up with a facility 10 years from now that has 30 units, because you won't be coming back.
Okay, so is there discussion on, Phyllis seconded that, is there discussion on that amendment, not on the original motion, but on that amendment? Jeff? Sorry.
Well, I'm not sure procedurally how to do this, but I was hoping to discuss the entire package, what we're trying to achieve, and a couple issues or alternative ways to do it. So do I wait till you go back to the main motion? Or did I miss my chance?
No, I think technically we need to address this amendment, and then we can come back to broader discussion of the whole thing. Is that okay? Well, I have a comment on that. I'm a little hesitant to support a cap. I don't see how they could fit 30 units on this site, ever. They're already impacting the wetland buffers probably more than they, or the maximum that they would be allowed to, looking at that plan. There's a 35-foot height limit in this zone. So that plan showed 6. If you went up 2 stories, you'd be at 12. Even if you maxed that out to 3 stories with a flat roof, you'd be at 18. I don't know how you'd park 18 units. I mean, there's some practical considerations in the maximum that this site can accommodate, and I would hate to turn away a family with 4 kids because we capped it at a number that only allowed a family with 2 kids. Adults, an adult cap. Yeah. I would hate to turn away one mom because we capped it at 19 and she's the 20th. And the organization has the funding to accommodate them. So from my perspective, there's a natural cap on this site, and the land use regulations that are in place are going to dictate that. And so for me personally, I'm just comfortable with letting the design review and the development regulations address that issue. Eric?
I agree. When suggesting the organizational master plan, I don't want any way to try to tell Lydia Place how to run their operation. They know that business much better than we do. We're acknowledging that's an essential service. The design review is going to handle, setbacks, going to handle impervious service coverage. There is going to be a cap. I don't know what that number is, and I wouldn't feel comfortable suggesting what that number is. So I think those are going to be well regulated within the bounds of our design review and our multifamily design regulations. So I wouldn't support a cap because I wouldn't feel comfortable saying what that number is.
Phyllis?
I was going to ask Lisa if she wanted to withdraw the motion then.
Not really, because I think if the height limit is 35 feet, so you could theoretically, not that it's feasible, but, if you went 3 stories up, I mean, we could be looking at 40 or 50 adults plus children, potentially between all of the land, because if you go 8 by 3 plus with the other building, it is kind of an open window, and I think the concern is how much, we're talking about opening up the lid for a very extensive time, and I'm looking at 20 or 30 years, and it's in a single-family neighborhood, what kind of impact that would have. The likelihood of taking down existing buildings to build up, but if you also build your initial building with the potential to build up, then I think it exceeds the capacity of what should be allowed in that neighborhood. So I'm looking at, that's why I didn't specify what the cap would be, but I would like them to discuss what they think would be reasonable for that site, keeping in consideration the neighborhood, and self-decide amongst planning what would be reasonable. Because I'm looking 20 years down the line, what could potentially develop because of need, and this may not be the place to do that. And so that's why I was wanting to have the cap, and it would be adults so that we're not turning away children. But that's why I didn't say 19. If they said 25, because they think in the future they might be able to expand a little bit, then there is a limit, but it also would trigger that if they want to go beyond that in time, they're going to have to come back to this process and make that request, and then we can look at what the impacts would be at that point. That was my reasoning behind it.
Okay. Kurt?
I would just add to that. Technically, I agree with what Commissioner O'Brien and Taishi have said, is that the site has its own constraints. As we know with development, sometimes properties can't achieve the overall density because of all those other requirements that come into it, stormwater, parking requirements. So there is this kind of natural cap on development as well. And I think one of the, at least following how we got to the cap, was because of some of the concerns and issues that we heard. Honestly, I think your organizational management plan can deal with those issues. So as you get more people, you potentially have those issues. But if you've got that management plan and that structure to deal with those issues, then the cap shouldn't necessarily have an impact or be necessary. You combine those two factors of the limited space available to build, and then that management plan, I think you're achieving what you're trying to achieve with the cap.
To a certain degree, go ahead, Phyllis.
Kurt, are there consequences if they don't live up to an agreement, or anybody who would sign an agreement with the city doesn't live up to the agreement?
Sure. The city has contracts, we have permit conditions, we have covenants on properties that we utilize to enforce when people don't follow the rules. So we definitely have a mechanism through those different parameters to enforce when necessary.
okay, then I would be inclined to not support the cap then, if there are other ways of maintaining control.
I think you make a good point. It's kind of like the issues we have with no more than 3 unrelated and students in some of our neighborhoods, where it's not that 4 kids living in a house all of a sudden makes them bad or behave poorly. It's it's a behavioral issue, not a numbers issue. And the real issue is, how are these people being managed? We could have 10 people with bad management cause way more trouble for the neighborhood than 40 people with really good management. So I'm just inclined to look at it from that management perspective. But I think you do make valid points about looking down the road, Lisa, and what could be done. And I don't know how we address what might happen at that point. Tom?
Regarding the numbers issue, this is basically single mothers and families, right? If you have 19 units, you've got 19 families, 19 adults. Seems to me that that's the natural cap. And if they want to expand, say, go up another story or 2 at a later time, they have to come back through the procedures to get more density.
All right, is there any other discussion on this particular amendment? Okay, I think we should have a vote on it. So, correct me if I mess this up, but basically restating the motion was to amend Garrett's original motion to add a cap in the zoning table, unspecified by the Planning Commission, but worked out amongst staff and presented to council effectively. Okay, so we have a motion. We should have a vote. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay?
No.
Okay. 6-1. So I think the proper term is it dies on the table or something along those lines. And I haven't read my Robert's rules too closely. And we move back now to discussion of the original motion. And that's not to suggest you can't make another motion relative to that topic at all. And Jeff, I think you wanted to make some comments about the broader
Right.
discussion.
Yeah, the only comment, well, actually it's not, I shouldn't say the only comment, but it's the one thing about covenants and about recording things on title is, this seems like a transitional use. If you look 20 or 30 years down the road, there may very well be a larger facility that's more cost effective per unit to run, that's a hotel or, a motel or some other site. A lot of things happen over decades. And when you put covenants on land and you bind it, maybe in 30 years that'll be split into 6 single-family houses. And there's this covenant that's permanent. It's always there. It'll always be there. So I'm just wondering, again, just sort of reevaluating how to do this, whether it might just not make sense to have an additional 3 sentences in the zoning table that just say what we want it to say and just have that be it.
What would it say?
Well, that there would be a management plan. That would be for sure one of those, the issue. And, if we happen to feel, and that management plan would address a number of things, and you could either have that in the text or you could have it in the staff report that goes forward with it as a notation. And the other thing that we could or may not do is basically set a condition on overnight staffing, at least 5 nights a week or something. If we feel strongly enough about that being a core issue of an expanded facility. The problem is if this ends up in the zoning table, between the time that this gets approved and the time that the facility gets expanded, you need overnight staffing. So, you'd shoot yourself in your foot.
You could make it only for an expanded facility.
Only for an expanded facility, yeah, but basically just add 2 sentences or in the zoning table and just call it good. And then the city would have the latitude through a management plan to do what needs to be done, and you wouldn't cloud the title, essentially. If you wouldn't create this, I've been in a house that's had covenants from the 50s that are very embarrassing. So, it's just one of those things where, you record it and it's there forever, and if it's a zoning issue and it should be in a zoning table, I'd rather have it in a table.
So
you gonna comment?
I just wanted to clarify one thing regarding covenants is typically when the city does require a covenant for some sort of reason, we have language in there that allows the covenant to be revoked if circumstances change. So it doesn't stay there forever if something changes. So we've always got language in there that allows for that to happen.
Okay, I withdraw my comment.
The
It's just
covenant,
full
the
speed
covenant
ahead.
could be extinguished.
Was that what you were suggesting was a organizational plan that was then recorded on the title?
Yeah.
Because if it's incorporated into the comprehensive plan, does it need to be recorded on title? I mean, what purpose does it serve? Just like our next topic is about the institutional master plan for Western. It's not a covenant recorded on title, but we abide by it because it's adopted into the, would we have to actually adopt the organizational master plan into the comp plan? Or I guess procedurally, how does that work?
No, we definitely wouldn't want to do that. I think if you have a condition of approval that it has to have a management plan in place, then in order for us to issue any permits to allow this to go forward, we have to make sure that there is a management plan, whether it's just recorded with the city, whether it's recorded on the title. There are different ways of dealing with that.
My only thought with recording on title is that'd be public information that'd be accessible to anybody in the neighborhood that wanted to go pull a title report, see what that organizational master plan is, and then get information about how that facility is being run.
The problem is, what if that document is dynamic and it changes over time to address change? Like, let's say the neighbors recognize a specific issue that they didn't recognize before, and they come to the Lydia Place and say, we really need you to address this, and Lydia Place board incorporates new information, and then we have to go like amend an amendment to the covenant.
Well, if
and maybe you do that, but that does add a little complex. It kind of, once you record it and it says these are the rules, that's pretty static.
Yeah, and I was saying the rules could be fairly generic. It's just trying to mitigate the impacts of the intensified use. We do this, we do it all the time, as, talking about, noise and just general policies. And those are dynamic by nature, and they can adapt.
And I think you can write a covenant that requires a management plan, but that's the management plan with your broad topics. The management plan is dealing with these types of things, has to be recorded against the property. You can do that. The details of that plan don't have to be incorporated into that document. So.
Could you require like annual reporting, or not annual reporting, but annual like provision of like the 2016, here's our 2016 plan, city, and then 2017, they give you the 2017 plan, and maybe nothing's changed and they just change the date that year, but that way like every year the city's getting an update. Could that be incorporated into that somehow? I don't want to create...
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you already have to do that as part of our funding. So when you do receive funding...
The city has not really had oversight of specific managerial functions such as guest policies, and
Sure.
I don't think that's something the city has really wanted to get involved with. So we are required to have a management plan and maintenance plan and all sorts of things, but they're, as you said, we're required to have one, and then the city reviews those, but they're not. I don't know where they go. You got things way above my head here, but yes, we do those things, and yes, the city participates in that process, and that's all I can say about that.
Jeff?
Just to move along, I just want to bounce an idea off everybody, and if so, I'll make it as a friendly amendment. And that is just to take the special regulation language that's here and add on this following dependent clause, subject to a city-approved management plan, period. And then move it forward and have our minutes reflect our discussion about wanting some enforcement and about the sorts of things that we want to see in a plan, and have that go to council for them. And in the meantime, staff can recommend the mechanism for doing this, and we can just make our concerns and intentions clear.
I second that. By doing so, you're going to have, my only concern is that you're going to have the public would have access to looking at that document. If it's in the zoning table, they'll have access to seeing that document.
Well, I think it's always a public document. I mean, once something's submitted to the city and it's approved by the city, it's all public.
But to know that that exists, if you don't
Yeah.
see any language that references you to that, you wouldn't know that it existed.
So we've had a motion, amendment, and a second. Really, though, it's actually a restatement of, I feel like that's not really an amendment so much as a restatement of what Garrett's motion was.
It can be a restatement. I was just raising that. Would you like me to make that as a formal restatement?
No, I'm just thinking like we do, I mean, it really replaces what you've suggested.
Yeah, it's just a tweak.
So if everyone's okay with that, we can have a discussion. I guess that just continues the discussion. More than an amendment, it's more just a restatement of how we would approach this. I think that's a pretty good idea. I don't know. I think we should be looking at the broad context of all this, and it's staff's job and the council's job to a certain degree to decide the details. But I think I think the proposal meets the comprehensive plan criteria and the rezone criteria. And I think in a broad, it does have direct impacts to immediate neighbors, and every single project does. But when you look at the public welfare from a broad context, it meets that criteria, in my opinion. I think Garrett's idea is a good idea, and that's my 2 cents, and I would vote to support that, Jeff. Lisa?
Before we vote, I just also want to voice my support. I've known several of your graduates or your residents who have moved on very successfully, and you guys do an outstanding job. My primary concern, again, is just making sure that we help mitigate some of the concerns the neighbors have. And I was really happy to hear that the last few years that their concerns seem to be better facilitated. And so hopefully that relationship continues. But kudos for you guys. You do a fantastic job. And I really am looking forward to hopefully a very well thought out expansion to serve this very much deserved population to get some assistance. So thank you.
Lisa, you mentioned the 3 main concerns. I think you described them really well. And I think Jeff's right. The minutes should speak to that. And the minutes, and those specifically, just to restate them, really were the parking concerns, the safety concerns, and the management, off-hour management concerns. Is that what I remember you listed them, and they were very clear. And so I think the record should definitely speak to that. Anybody? Jeff?
Heather had just mentioned that, there might be a material difference between the original motion of having it be a covenant or having it be recorded versus having it be approved by the city. And we went back and forth, but I actually intended not to say that it wouldn't be recorded, but that it would be staff would come up with a mechanism. It may be recording so I don't think that a material changed things. I think it's just still flexible enough so staff can decide how that should best be done and when this goes to council.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear about that because I'm not changing the direction totally, just clarifying that.
And your proposed language would leave that, it would carry that intent, but leave that open, leave Garrett's motion open to staff and council making the final decision on how that's implemented. Is there any other discussion? Okay, so there's been a motion and a second. And just I'll try and restate this in as clear as I can. The motion was to recommend the findings of fact, recommend to the council to adopt the findings of fact and conclusions as drafted, with the addition of a sentence or a continuation of that sentence in the special regulations table, subject to a city-approved operational management plan, with the details of that to be worked out at a future date. So we will need to take a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that carries 7-0. And with that, that will end that public hearing. And I'd like to thank the public and the applicant and staff for taking the time to work through that with us. And I look forward to seeing what you come up with. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think it's 9 o'clock or nearly 9 o'clock. If we could take a quick break, just a 5-minute break till 9:05, and then we'll move on with the second one. Do you need 10, Tom? Let's take a 10-minute break. 9:10, everyone please be back. We'll start the second public hearing. Thank you. Okay, we will call the meeting back to order. So this next public hearing is for institutional master plan amendment for Western Washington University. And this is a quasi-judicial matter. It's a little bit different than a legislative action. There's no communication between applicants or the planning commission and staff, really with anybody prior to this public hearing. And I have some legal obligations. There's 3 questions that I need to ask of the planning commission before we start this quasi-judicial matter. If no one has a affirmative response, then we'll just move on to the next one. You don't need to say anything. So is there any member of the commission that objects to another member's participation on this matter? Is there any member of the commission that has an interest in the property? At this time, I will ask any member of the commission to place on record the substance of any communication that has taken place outside of this hearing related to this topic, if any. Okay, thank you. So with that, we can move into, are we going to approach this with a staff and an applicant presentation? Chris?
Yes, we are.
Okay, and staff first, applicant first?
I'll introduce it, and I'll turn it over to the applicant, and then I'll take Tim after that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so what you have before you is consideration of a quasi-judicial amendments to Western Washington University Institutional Master Plan. The subject proposal, it's requested by Western, is to amend the Western Institutional Master Plan, I'll just call it IMP, to enlarge IMP District 18 and allow student housing along South College Drive between the Buchanan Towers Residence Hall and Fairhaven Student Housing Complex. As part of the proposal, Western IMP District 13 districts 13, 15, and 17 would be reduced in size, and student activities would be added as an IMP land use classification in District 18. Other parts of the Western IMP will be amended as necessary to be consistent with the preceding proposed amendments. So again, this is a quasi-judicial proceeding. The Planning Commission must hold a public hearing and issue findings of fact, conclusions, and recommendations to City Council. Quasi-judicial review procedures in the Bellingham Municipal Code stipulate that following the Commission's review, City Council will consider the proposal at a closed record hearing. The City Council shall not accept new information on the application, but shall consider the complete record before the Commission and the recommendation of the Commission. So it's very important that you create a complete record for your recommendations. As part of your recommendations, you cannot ask for or recommend new studies be provided for City Council to assist them in their decision. Basically, if you determine that that additional information is necessary, then you would leave the public hearing open and basically stay this to the next available date until that information is provided, and then hold the public record open and allow for public comment on that, and you would consider the new information and make a recommendation on that new information together with the rest of the proposal to City Council.
Thank you.
So with that, I will turn this over to Western's representatives to basically give an outline of the proposal. We have Ed Simpson here and Steve Gillespie.
Hi, I'm Ed Simpson. I'm the Assistant Director for Facilities Development and Capital Budget at Western. And with me is Steve Gillespie. He's a land use attorney who works for the firm that worked with Western developing the original Western Washington University Institutional Master Plan. As Chris said, this proposal is for an amendment to the WWU IMP to enlarge IMP District 18 and allow student housing along South College Drive. So I can see this a little hard to see, but this is Buchanan Towers, Bill McDonald Parkway, South College Drive, and the proposed site. The future student housing project will require a separate environmental and project review process during the design phase. Beginning in the spring of 2015, the university began looking at adding more student housing on campus. This site north of Buchanan Towers along South College Drive was identified as the preferred site. This is basically the campus institutional master plan site. It's made up of a number of districts that were originally developed to identify the character within the campus in the different district zones. In the fall of 2015, we met with city planning staff to look at the planning issues related to the site. The future housing project landed on the border of 3 IMP districts. It was determined at that meeting that an IMP district line revision would be the best method to address the proposed project. This shows a revised map of the campus showing the modified District 18 down here on the south portion of campus. District 18 is proposed to be increased so that the proposed 150 to 200 bed facility would fall within the institutional master plans, building area ratios, and floor area ratios that we have for density on campus. The boundaries with districts 13, 15, 17, and 18 were realigned to enlarge that District 18. This is the same map with an overlay of an aerial photograph, basically showing some of the existing locations. This is Buchanan Towers. This area here is the Fairhaven residential complex, and then this area down in here is the area known as the Outback. A neighborhood meeting was held March 14th for public comment, but there was no attendance at that meeting. The city did not receive any public comment on this project until this morning. The comments received involved the issue of concern about the potential shading of the Outback Gardens. We have received those comments from the city this afternoon, and we appreciate the feedback that we got, and we understand their concerns. We feel that this is a project-level concerns that we would address during the design of the facility. The Outback is an academic space overseen by a committee chaired by the Dean of Fairhaven College, and it is attended by students, Fairhaven, Huxley faculty, and Associated Students representatives. This committee will be involved in the design process as we move forward. It is something we've done previously when we did the addition to the previous Buchanan Towers addition, and we would do that again. And the project will be undergoing shading and solar access studies, so it's something we will be doing and addressing as part of the design of the future project. That pretty much wraps up. I thought you'd want something pretty brief.
Ed, thank you. Ed, can you point out that Outback area again that you're referring to?
It's this general area.
All of 17.
It's mainly developed in the valley floor, a little bit off on this other side, and then they have a outdoor amphitheater kind of in this area, and the center area is a wetland.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Actually, I'll stay right here for a moment. So, Western's IMP, it is required by Bellingham Municipal Code, Chapter 2040. It's the institutional chapter. And that institutional chapter basically requires that a master plan be created along with development standards for the institution, for the institutional use. The city has two institutional master plans adopted right now. One is Western, the other one is for the hospital. We are currently working on one for the community college right now. So an institutional master plan, it provides the more definitive standards to ensure that the campus evolves in a planned and coordinated manner while maintaining the campus character and academic mission. These standards include appropriate land uses, circulation and parking requirements, infrastructure improvements, building heights, setbacks, buffering, and landscaping requirements, and other guidelines for the development of campus. And so, again, the Western IMP, it was adopted in 2001. The Western Neighborhood Plan had a number of goals and policies that outlined the framework, the basic framework for that IMP. By adoption of that IMP, it implemented the purpose and intent of the Western Neighborhood Plan. Now, as Ed had stated, the reason for expanding Area 18 is that among the standards that were adopted for the Western IMP, they adopted a BAR and FAR system. Those are acronyms for building area ratio and floor area ratio. And for what they're proposing, it could not be built on this area. Basically, you could not carve out Area 18 to be only large enough to accommodate the proposed building, because the size of the proposed building would exceed the allowed bars and FARs. And so they had to grow District 18 to a size that would allow the floor area ratio and building area ratio. And so with that, by increasing the size into Area 13 and including the softball fields and the tennis courts, District 13 has a number of basically goals and policies regarding establishment of these facilities and such. And so staff is recommending that those elements in Area 13 be transferred over to Area 18 as part of this amendment process. And again, we did receive quite a bit of public comment this morning, about 18 separate correspondences, one of those being a petition with 250 signatures on it. The main concern about that is the solar access to the Outback Farm right in the center of Area 17, or along the western side of Area 17. We had our GIS staff, Kate, put together a analysis. And so this shows, this is the aerial photo, this is the Outback Farm right here. And what she has done is use the city's 2013 LiDAR survey, and that is short for light detection and ranging. Basically, this is accomplished through air photo. Basically, they're bouncing sound waves down, infrared off the ground, and what comes back up reflects the tree canopy cover in the area. And so you'll see with this that it gives good detail on what the valley of the Outback Farm is, and how the hillsides rise on either side, and then the tree canopy cover. So each one of these is a profile of the stripe that you see. And so within this stripe, you see there is a log cabin up at this end, and you'll see the rise in the land, and then this is Bill McDonald Parkway, and then again rises on the other side. This is what the tree canopy is at that level. Go to the next one.
Excuse me,
And
Chris.
actually, sorry, let me blow that up for you. Sorry about that.
You said the street is Bill McDonald. Isn't that South College? Wouldn't that be South College?
That is South College.
Yeah, not McDonald Parkway.
Right.
Okay.
Bill McDonald is the one
It's
at the
way
bottom.
down there, yeah.
You're right.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So
Yeah,
South College Drive. And so each of these gives a profile just for that section. So you saw the first one right there. The second one shows, again, this is the valley floor of the Outback Farm. As you progress down, there is a lessening of tree canopy, but still you can see that these heights are within the 25 to 30 foot range for these lower trees right here. Continuing down, it drops to about a 25-foot tree canopy, and then it increases pretty substantially in density again. So again, this is the valley floor of the Outback Farm. Again, that valley floor, and if any of you did a walking tour of the area, you might have walked on the trail on top of the bench up there. The last one shows Buchanan Towers and the relationship of the height of that building to the tree canopy. And Buchanan Towers is outside of the Outback Farm, but that is a 8-story building right there. And I understand what's being proposed is about a 5-story building. So again, just running back up through that, you can see that tree cover. So again, the institutional master plan was adopted as a requirement of the Bellingham Municipal Code. Staff has reviewed the amendments and find that the amendments are supported by the comprehensive plan, and that they are also consistent with the criteria and required elements of the institutional chapter. We have provided analysis in the staff report. If you have questions on any of the individual items, I'd be happy to answer those. We did issue a preliminary determination or intent to adopt a determination of non-significance, SEPA determination of non-significance on this as a non-project action, as Ed stated, that when a project, specific proposal comes forward for this site, that would require separate SEPA analysis and determination. So staff is recommending that Actually, based on the above, staff finds that the proposed amendments to the institutional master plan are consistent with the Western Washington University Neighborhood Plan, the University Institutional Master Plan, and the goals and policies of the city's comprehensive plan. And staff hereby recommends approval of the proposed IMP amendments as generally shown in attachments 2, 3, and 4 of the staff report, and described to adjust the boundaries between IMP land use districts 13, 15, 17, and 18 to increase the size of District 18, to add a new student activities land use classification to Western IMP District 18, to update and reallocate development parameters between the realigned districts 13, 15, 17, and 18, including those related to primary land uses, character goals, and development recommendations and rationale that are currently applicable to development adjacent to Bill McDonald Parkway in District 13, and that those should be carried over to the expanded District 18 shown in attachments 3 and 4. And also to amend other parts of the Western IMP, including maps, as necessary to be consistent with the changes in 1 through 3 above. One thing I'll note is, so in your packet, you have, for example, attachment 3 and attachment 4. These are the two primary districts seeing changes, districts 13 and district 18. Each district in the plan has its own 2-page section that outlines the primary land uses and land use designation and such. They each include a section of the main map that Ed showed you that for the entire campus. There's one main adopted map, and then for each district, there's a snapshot. And so you can see that area 16, 20, 19, where those appear in this IMP, just the maps are going to have to change to reflect this change to area 18. So there are minor amendments, just minor changes that would take place elsewhere in the IMP, just to be consistent with what's being proposed here. So staff further recommends that the Planning Commission direct staff to prepare an ordinance reflecting the above amendments for City Council consideration. We didn't put together an ordinance at this time because it is going to be rather large to address all of these minute changes. So that concludes my presentation. And I was going to bring to your attention, as part of that petition that was brought forward. Let's do this. That didn't. There are a couple of amendments being suggested by the petitioners. One is if the IMP amendments are approved, to consider adding in the language, accommodate Western as well as Southern solar exposure required by the outdoor experiential learning site by careful siting of any future structure. Right now, the language only addresses southern exposure, and that would be in your Exhibit 4. I think it's page 2-13. It's the second bullet down under character goals and development recommendations. It basically says the same thing, except that this would include the western exposure, solar exposure. The second would be a request to prohibit request that the expansion of District 18 be prohibited from disrupting established garden space that have been maintained for 2 years or more. I would say that That one would be difficult for the city to enforce. That's more of a, again, programmatic item by the university, and I think that they'll address that more. The first one, the existing language that is in Area 18, that doesn't address the western exposure, but it says the southern exposure. That same language is in Area 17 for the Outback Farm. And so with the Outback Farm, and that one is not in your packet. So if you do have a copy of the IMP with you, which you likely don't, the language was the same for both districts. The issue, the purpose and intent was to accommodate southern solar exposure, whether it's development in the Outback Farm area or in District 18. And so I think it's the solar exposure that is very important for that farm. And you can see that the existing tree canopy in that area is to the west is very impactful, and development that's being proposed is outside of that area. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm available.
Thank you, Chris. I think we'll take public comment, and then we'll have any questions from Planning Commission. So similar to the same as the last hearing, we'll have an opportunity for public comment if anyone would like to speak. You have 3 minutes to speak about the topic. Just give your name and address before you speak. There's only one person who's signed up, and that is Camilla Black. And so if she could come down, and then if anyone else would like to speak after her, then just come on down when she's finished. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Kamea Black. My address is 14 Hawks Hill Place, Bellingham, Washington, 98229. And as a side note, if you do want it for your reference, I did bring a printout of the relevant pages that are in discussion today of the Western Institutional Master Plan that covers both District 17 and 18. I'm here today speaking as the current coordinator of the Outback Farm, as well as a student and the author of the petition that was presented. The petition was drafted after listening to a lot of concerns of the community members that I represent and I work with on a daily basis, a lot of which was like ready to picket and ready to riot, and me having to reassure them that no, they are not trying to take our farm. What they're trying to do is be our neighbors, and how do we best do that? And thus far, Western has been very neighborly and willing to work with me and the community and meets with me when I request it. As well as anybody else who has a voice. The two requests that I would like to address is that of the solar exposure, which has been well represented already, but I do want to add that it already exists within District 17 that we protect the southern solar exposure, and as well as 18. And as 18 expands onto our western side, I would hope that that same language then carries to that, because that's where it's expanding, and we don't have a lot of sun as it is. The second, which is more program oriented about not disrupting gardens that are established for 2 years or more, kind of addresses the land use that's in our plan, which is to incorporate residential uses and academic activities there. And every garden that's in that space, and there's lots of specific gardens in different areas of the farm, represent a different cultural background or a different plant interest. And so if any development were to infringe upon that, then any established perennial plants specifically, or ones that had been around for a long time, those could be disturbed. And even if the border goes into it, that's fine. We'll, put a gate there. The new residents can interact with them. But if the beds are disturbed, then that could be an issue. And those are the main two things I have to bring to your attention this evening. Yeah. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say is that the petition that was submitted had 250 signees at the time that I submitted it, at the deadline of when you were accepting written comment. When I closed it officially at 4:30 this evening, it had 281 signatures as well as comments. And if you wanted to review that, I have that here today as well.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking. And you mentioned earlier that new information can't be entered into the record after this. So if you want to, is it appropriate for her to provide the updated petition with more signatures for council consideration, or is it too late?
Yeah, no, definitely. We want to, right now you're creating the record, so
Yeah.
anything that she has, definitely submit tonight so it can be included in the
So
record.
please make sure a copy of that gets to Heather so she can include that in the record. Thank you. Are there any other comments? So we've got one. Yes? All right.
Good evening. My name is John Tuxell. I live at 1604 20th Street in Bellingham. I also work at Western. I am the associate professor at Fairhaven College, and I work in an advisory role to the Outback, advisory to both the Dean of Fairhaven College and to the students in the actual management of the site. I think most of the issues have been pretty well summarized here. I just wanted to make a couple of additional points. First of all, I thank the city staff for the work they put into doing the very useful LiDAR analysis of the ridgeline. I do want to point out that with a tree canopy profile along the ridge that is somewhat discontinuous, there is a variation that you saw in the tree canopy height, which means that in some of the key areas along the ridge there where you have the greatest density of gardens, those are the spots where there's relatively little tree cover, lower tree cover along the ridge in those pockets, and that a discontinuous tree canopy is different from a solid building in terms of the uppermost part of that tree canopy, the amount of light that comes through. So there are a few technical additions that subtleties that I think might be worth considering as well. But overall, I found the analysis extremely useful. I also had a couple of questions more as a resident of the Happy Valley neighborhood, separate from my role at Western, about this project. My main question was whether the determination of non-significance, if that takes into account the footprint of impervious surfaces and the potential impact on the stormwater runoff treatment system that is in place right below Bill McDonald Parkway there with the engineered wetland. It wasn't quite clear to me whether that was part of what was considered or is considered at this stage, or if that waits for a latter SEPA process once the actual building is proposed. But that is I know, speaking as a neighborhood resident concerned about the water quality of Patton Creek and everything downstream from the southern edge of the university, that's certainly a consideration that I think is very important. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is anybody else? Yes, come on down.
Hello, my name is David Stein. I live on 1212 North Garden Street, and I'm also a student at Fairhaven College and also an employee of the Outback Farm. This is my second year working there, and it's a beautiful place, really magical. But I want to point out a few things that when you look at the Outback Farm, it seems like a pretty large space, and we have a lot of space to work with. But there's a tributary going down the middle of it, and on the side that is adjacent to the lot being proposed to be developed, that's where the majority of our gardening and farming happens, because the other half is covered with trees. So this is where we do most of the farming and gardening. And I also want to point out this would have effects that go beyond the quality of experiential learning for the students, that the beds used in this site are used to grow food for the food banks. Every year, we grow a couple thousand pounds worth of produce for the food banks, and also Common Threads, a local program in town that works with kids, comes out every summer and does summer camps in these educational beds. So I just really hope we are mindful with how we affect the future exposure of the sun, because if we interfere with this, well, that will affect the entire operations of the farm. And I know it may sound like a bunch of hippies are scared that their sun exposure may disappear, but this will really affect how this farm is operating. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Okay. Any other speakers? Okay, seeing no one, we will close the public comment portion of the hearing. And if there's staff responses that you want to make, you can do that now, and then we'll have a discussion. Or if not, we'll move directly into discussion.
Sure, I can respond to the SEPA evaluation. Again, this is a non-project action SEPA, so we're at a very high level. It's kind of a phased SEPA approach. So once a specific development proposal comes forward, we'll do an additional SEPA on that, and that's where we get into the project-specific details, stormwater, all of those types of things. So there is an additional SEPA process that will occur with the building.
A couple of things I wanted to point out, if I may. It's not showing up really well on the map here, but you can see that the trail, this is the trail at the top of the ridge that connects Buchanan Towers up through to Fairhaven College. And that trail is the new district boundary. And so you'll see, I actually had some photos at the end that I forgot to show, that the large vegetation is pretty much on the east side of that trail. So again, going back to the boundaries being proposed, this line right here is that trail boundary. And the photos, that trail is right at the top of the ridge. And then these were some photos that I took. And so this is standing at the north end of the Outback Farm by their gate, their deer gate, as you walk into the farm, looking south. And you can see that there's quite a tree line along that ridge. You have conifers, evergreens at the north and south end, and then you have some shorter deciduous. Those are in the range of about 25 feet above that trail that's above this ridge right here. Again, this is a valley floor. It slopes up. So going to the next photo, this is up on that ridge now, looking north. The Outback Farm is down below now. And this lamp right here is about a 12-foot tall lamp. These trees along the ridge that are deciduous are capping out at about right here. They're about 25 feet. Again, this would be the boundary of the district. So development would take place on the west side of the district, and largely, as I understand, leave this ridge line untouched. And correct me if I'm wrong. This is basically, again, looking north, and instead of looking to the east side of the trail, this is looking to the west side of the trail, and it drops down the hill to West College Drive. The next photo is basically turning around, walking forward, I think about 50 feet, and the trail branches. There's a main pedestrian corridor that's asphalt that continues to the west and down to Buchanan Towers towards the west side of it. This one is just a footpath, and this is the tree canopy in this area of the evergreens. Again, this is on the east side of the main, or this is on the west side of the main pedestrian corridor. That is all I wanted to show you.
Thank you.
May I respond on behalf of the applicant?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, Steve Gillespie, Foster Pepper for Western. I want to start by thanking the people who showed up to comment on this and the people who have gotten involved. Western really does hear their concerns, and I'm very glad to hear that nobody's rioting, but we're going to be talking about it because that's exactly what should be happening. As Chris mentioned earlier, a lot of these are project level concerns. And we would encourage these students and faculty to be involved in the building, siting, and design process as appropriate. I do want to address the two specific requests that were made. Excuse me. You have the request to add the word Western, and the phrase add Western as well as Southern exposure. While that is similar to the language that's in the existing IMP, this is a quasi-judicial proceeding, and your decision, your recommendation, and the council's decision have to be based on facts in the record. And the record at this point doesn't have evidence to support adding that phrase. Does it make much difference? It's hard to say. I mean, when we get into the process of designing and siting this building, these questions are going to be considered. This is an academic program that Western values very highly, that is important to Fairhaven College. It's not like Western is just going to go in and steamroll this thing. But that said, there's not sufficient evidence in the record to support adding that condition. The other request, quoting, request that expansion of District 18 be prohibited from disrupting established gardening spaces. We understand the reason for the concern and for the request, but this is not the right forum for that request. The Western, by statute, governs its own academic programs, and that's not the city's bailiwick. There's a very fine line between what the city can regulate through its land use authority and what the Board of Trustees regulates ultimately. So those are concerns that should be brought to the university administration, and they will be taken into account. But for the action that's being requested here, this is a very minor amendment to the IMP. It's not adding development capacity to the university campus. All it's doing is moving borders around to make the arithmetic work to allow the university to site a needed student housing facility near the existing Buchanan Towers. Especially in light of the prior discussion that we heard regarding the project that went before us. This is a community that's in dire need of additional housing, and student housing, on-campus student housing, has a positive impact on a community that has what I understand is a residential vacancy rate of less than 1%. So this is a very important project. As our staff has said, this is a non-project action that you're considering, and the concerns that are being addressed here will be addressed in the project level permitting and associated SEPA review.
Thank you. I think we should open it up to discussion. Steve?
Stupid question to start this off. What is the Outback Farm? Is this connected with one of the colleges, a horticultural program? Is this community gardens for students? I never really heard an explanation of what's there.
It is an academic program. It's jointly kind of run currently with Fairhaven College and Associated Students. So as John said, he is actually on the part of the committee and kind of an oversight with them as a faculty role. And Camia is with Associated Students. I believe she's... you paid through Associated Students? All three of us are. Okay. Yeah, Associated Students has paid coordinators that help with it. And I don't know if there's also club involvement as well as the academic program. The students could probably tell you more about that than me.
But they have a potential of earning academic credits for participating in this farm program?
From what I understand, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Tom?
Yeah, I have a question, which should seem very obvious, but in attachment 2A, you've got dotted lines here, and nothing that tells me what the dotted line is. I am assuming it is the former boundaries for those zones, but, you know, I'm just a dumb Norwegian.
I believe you're correct.
That is correct.
Originally, when we developed the districts, they were for character purposes when we first, that was our first intent. So a lot of them don't make a lot of sense, because some of them even go through corners or parts of building. They don't have reference points.
Yeah, I was going to say it looked like it was drawn by a dumb Norwegian. And my other comment is that the Outback has been here longer than I have, I believe, and I've been in Bellingham since 1970. And I could not believe that there was no place on here that specifically identified the Outback. I had to look and make sure that I understood where it was, because I've walked that a lot of times over a lot of years, and I wanted to understand where this boundary thing was happening.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think the Outback has a real set defined boundary. There are some deer prevention fences that kind of maybe indicate part of what the border is.
Right.
But it's been mainly always down in the valley there. And there used to be some cabins on the north sides that originally, when it was first started, students had the ability to live in that also participated in.
Mm-hmm. I remember them. I didn't live there.
Yeah. What's the land use designation for Area 17?
I can't.
Yeah, I actually did bring my copy of the IMP. I've got it on my computer here. So again, the districts were never intended to be regulatory. They've sort of morphed into that, and it lists primary land uses. I'm reading from page 2-48 of the IMP as academic, open space, recreation, student activities, and storage. City land use designation, of course, is institutional.
Sure. So you guys don't have specific designations towards areas that would be suited for housing or development? It's more a characterization of what's actually there.
I can answer that. You do. The next category down is the institutional master plan land use classification. So at the top, it lists the existing primary land uses. At the bottom is the actual institutional master plan land use classifications. So for District 17, it's academic, student activities, and open space.
And so 18 would have a designation that is appropriate for housing.
Is it residential and open space? Yeah, I apologize for.
But that same designation was in 17, was residential in 17 as well?
No, 17 does not have residential.
So it's always been dedicated for more open space.
Right. And again, academic and student activities.
Mm-hmm.
Steve? What is the significance of including now the softball field and the tennis courts within expanded 18? Is that for future?
No, it just basically gave us the land area to be able to create a vertical building on the other side of the street.
The IMP includes, and Chris mentioned this, the IMP includes building area ratio and floor area ratio restrictions. So in order to get enough denominator in that ratio, we had to expand to include the softball field and the tennis court. You'll see, though, in the amendment that it just moves that primary use to 18.
Okay. Well, the last few months, we've been talking about rental units in the city of Bellingham, especially on the south side, impacts of Western on housing units and the rental units in the area. And I totally support any type of new dormitory or housing within the campus boundaries. I think it's well needed. I think it's great timing, and I think that this would be a great addition to your campus.
Yeah, Steve, I would echo that sentiment. There's, whether true or not, there's a perception, I think, in the community that Western has not pulled as much weight as they could in terms of housing, and then that pressure has projected out into the neighborhoods. And so I agree. Whether or not I don't necessarily agree that that's true. I'm just saying I agree with Steve that providing more housing on campus is a great thing, because we're seeing these other facilities going in the private facilities in the community, and they'll help, and this will also help. And all of these steps are positive steps toward addressing that issue. So I'm also very excited to see some action. And I believe that the valid concerns that have been raised through the public comment are most appropriately addressed. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but as
Steve.
Steve.
Everybody here is named Steve.
As Steve mentioned, through the, and staff also mentioned, through there's going to be design review, SEPA, right? Those kinds of processes.
Institutional development is exempt from design review.
Oh, no design review. So this will just be a building permit with SEPA?
Yes.
Okay. Lisa?
I also agree that this is a good move to develop more housing for students. And I also am very familiar with Fairhaven and Outback and students, and I don't necessarily think we need to have a design review come before us, because I think the students are going to give you your money's worth to make sure that their Outback is protected, because if not, you may have those riots, but just keep it on campus, okay? Because that's where it needs to be. I was a student when they had a sit-in and took over Old Main when they weren't happy with an issue. So I have full confidence that the students will work with you guys to ensure that they get what they want.
Is there any questions or commentary, Jeff?
Ready for a motion?
Always.
Okay. Well, I move to accept the findings of fact, conclusions, and recommendations contained in the May 19th, 2016 staff report as written, and forward recommendation for approval to the City Council.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. The motion was to accept the findings of fact, conclusions, and recommendations as stated in the May 19th, 2016 document, and recommend staff to draft an ordinance to move to council. Accurate? Yes. Kurt, I missed something in there?
Just because I've been through several quasi-judicial proceedings lately and understanding the importance of creating the record, I think I just want to make it clear that the record contains the current IMP, the public comment received, and then both PowerPoints presented tonight, just as a matter of making sure that it's a complete record.
Yeah, thank you. And, in that vein, I think we've got a motion in a second. We can have additional discussion. We can have a vote. I think what carries through with that motion, that discussion, is that the Planning Commission agrees with these findings and agrees that the proposal meets those specific criteria that are identified for institutional land use designations, and that we have to evaluate this by. And I don't feel it's necessary to go through each individual one and discuss them. There's a lot of detail in the staff report, and unless a specific commissioner wants to talk about a specific issue, I think it's implicit in our recommendation, if that motion moves forward, that that we've evaluated these criteria and that we concur with these criteria and the staff discussion of these criteria and consistency. So I think it's important to get that on the record as well. And so with that, is there any further discussion on this?
Just
Steve?
Quick comment.
Yeah.
Since I've been here on the Planning Commission, I have never seen a more professional petition with 200-plus signatures submitted to this body. And I would like to sincerely thank the people that were involved in this. That's a great message, and I think that I feel confident, like Lisa said, that your message will be heard, and you will be part of the participation and development of this new project on campus.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, with that, I think if there's no further discussion, we can have a vote. So all those in favor of the motion, as stated by Commissioner Brown, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that motion carries 7-0. And with that, we close the public hearing on this topic. And thank you, applicant, for presenting, and public for coming and participating, and also, like Steve said, generating all that written feedback for us. So with that, we'll close our second public hearing, and we will move to just kind of wrap up. This will only take a couple minutes, so if everyone could just hang tight so we don't disrupt the last few minutes of the meeting. Kurt, anything you want to add? Old, new business? We don't have a meeting right now scheduled.
Correct. Just wanted to give you a quick update on our subdivision ordinance update process. We've been working through that for quite some time now. I just wanted to let you know that we're getting back on track. Staff, after meeting with you and getting some direction on some issues that we needed to look at, we have started to draft some proposed language. What we're planning on doing now is going back to our technical groups. We're holding a couple technical groups within the month of June. We're going to have a couple meetings to just go back in and have them evaluate some of those proposed language changes. Part of that technical group would then be the Planning Commission subcommittee that was established. They would also be coming to those meetings, and after that, then we would bring the more refined proposal back to the Planning Commission as a whole for public hearing and discussion. So just wanted to let you know that hasn't been lost, and we've been working on it, and it's coming back soon.
Thank you. And so you anticipate bringing kind of a draft ordinance back? Is like for our next meeting?
Correct.
Not our next meeting, but our next meeting on that topic?
Correct.
Yeah. And do you see us having some work sessions on that and then a public hearing at the end, or just trying to do that all through a single?
I think we're still trying to refine that. One of the things that we found successful was how you addressed and dealt with the comprehensive plan and the different chapters. So we're trying to determine whether or not we bring kind of topic areas back to the commission so that you can discuss that and then maybe have a public hearing at the very end. So we are still refining that process. It will definitely include multiple opportunities for discussion from the community as well as the commission.
Great. Thanks for reminding us about that. Okay, any questions from commissioners on anything? Phyllis?
Calendar again. We have a scheduled meeting for the 2nd of June. I'm suspecting that that's not happening. We haven't seen an agenda.
There is nothing on the rest of the year on your calendar at this point.
Nothing for the rest of the year. Oh, how nice.
So just hold the 1st and 3rd, and yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for participation and hanging in there. And with that, we'll adjourn.